Okay, can I have a motion of approval from someone and a seconder, please?
I'll move.
Nina Marie,
Second,
and a seconder.
Eric.
You have Pat.
Eric, okay. Great, thank you very much. Okay, the day's agenda, as we've already discussed, just 2 items today. We'll be finishing hopefully around 1 o'clock, so there won't be a lunch break. Are there any members that wish to declare a conflict of interest?
I have this is Eric. I have a conflict for the second item, block 20.
Okay. No one else? Okay, thank you. So I guess, Chris, back to you to report back on last month's projects. I believe you have some slides.
Yep, Leon, you want to go to the first slide, please? So the Lower Bay visioning exercise, I thought that was a very helpful review session we had. Both of the options that we showed you are going to be studied further. And I think there's some suggestions for a kind of hybridized version of the best of both worlds that maybe addresses some of the plantings on the east side. The team is going to go to council and ask for direction to study these options and take them to 30% design when they bring forward the transit request. So that's good. Hopefully we will get further funding to do more work on this. And we think this is going to come back to the panel, if all goes well, in the spring of 2022. Next slide, please. The Waterfront East LRT Area 1, which is everything underneath what we were just talking about. The team is finalizing the 30% design submissions. This project is still very expensive, particularly the work around the Union Station loop. So the team is still looking at design cost optimizations, with the goal still, though, to report to council with a business case in December of this year. So we're going to have to work pretty quickly to scope this down to a slightly more reasonable cost, which probably means doing a bit less ambitious work in the Union Station loop, but I don't know what that will actually mean yet. So we will come back to you with more information once we've sorted that through. Next slide, please. The Legacy Art Project. We are working on our delivery agreement with them so that we can implement this art on their behalf, and still trying to determine if it's better if they enter into an agreement directly with the city, who will be the ultimate caretaker of this piece, or if they enter into an agreement with us, and then we enter into an agreement with the city to hand it over. So that's still being worked out. We hope to bring this back for detailed design sometime in the winter. Next slide, please. This is sort of the most dramatic thing we've done recently, which is the Gardner-Logan ramp removal. So the big abutment you see in the foreground is where the elevated Gardner used to touch down onto Lakeshore and bring cars up to Logan. And then on the left-hand side, close to the edge of the photo, you can actually see the elevated Gardner, and you can see where they chopped it off. And there's this huge stretch in between that no longer has the overhead deck or the columns. So all the decking's gone, all 22 girders, all concrete vents, and the steel vents have all been taken out, and this abutment is, I think, the last piece that's being removed. And then we'll start to put Lakeshore back together here in its temporary configuration, at least. And we've got just a couple deconstruction slides to show you. Go to the next one, Leon. There's a shot of the cut off truncated ends of the Gardner, and you can see 2 bents still being demoed here in the foreground.
Looks good. Get them to carry on. Go all the way west.
Well, it's tempting, isn't it? So this is a short bit of drone footage. If you want to run that, Leon, go ahead.
Yeah, let me just share the footage. Are you able to see this?
I think it's coming. Yep, there it is.
There we go.
Yeah.
And the most dramatic moment for me is if you are on Villiers Street, which I have been a couple times recently, and then you turn north to go up the Don Roadway, and you get to the intersection of the Don Roadway and the Lakeshore Bridge that goes west, which used to be covered by the Bents. And the reason we accelerated this part of the Gardner rebuild was so we could rebuild that Lakeshore Bridge over the Don. I think a lot of people don't even realize it is a bridge because the river comes down and makes that right-hand turn right next to it. And you can easily drive across and feel like the water is only to your right as you're heading east and not realize that it crosses in front of you. Wow, is it a different experience going over that bridge now than it used to be? So I think that's it. Do I have any other update slides, Leon, or is that?
Just one more slide on November and December's projects.
Yeah, so these are the upcoming meetings. You can see we've got the Legacy Art Project tentatively coming back in November, as well as the Parliament Slip Project and the 545 Lakeshore Boulevard West. Those are all still tentative as to whether or not they're going to make it then. And then December, we have the 200 Queens Quay West Project, the PIC4 Urban Design Guidelines, and the Bentway Bridge redesign. You can see many of these are sort of tentative. So I think if we end up with 4 of them, we're going to see if we can combine them all into the November agenda and avoid having a December meeting. Or if we can't do that, we may try to combine them all into the December agenda and not have a November meeting. So we're going to see what works, but I think there's a chance we can consolidate. If there's really only 4 items, we can hopefully consolidate them into one meeting. So we'll keep you posted.
Okay.
I think
That's
that's
it,
it,
Chris?
Yep.
Okay. I just have one remark I want to make. I don't know if people had a chance to watch a virtual session yesterday that with Chris and Gil Penalosa of 880 Cities. It was called A Walk in the Park, and it was I gotta say, Chris, a thorough, fantastic presentation of the whole process of the Don River renaturalization. And I believe there were people on the session from 35 different countries. And I saw some of the chat comments, and people were absolutely blown away by what we're doing here. So I just want to congratulate you, Chris, and everybody. It was I learned a lot, despite all of our prior knowledge about what we're doing there. I think it was very, very well received.
Oh,
That
thanks,
sounds
Paul.
great, Paul. Is there a link, Chris, that we can get, you can
That's
send
a really
us?
good question. I imagine they post all of these, but I don't know. It's it's Gil Penalosa's 880 Cities.
Was it
Yeah.
hosted by them? Was it hosted by 880 or part of another conference?
No, I think it was hosted by 880.
They will.
Yeah, I think, Chris, if I recall in the chats on that Gil did mention there, someone asked if there'd be a link, and I believe he said there would be. So I think 880 Cities might be the way to get into that. But it was what, I don't know, 35, 40 minutes, something, but it was really comprehensive and excellent. And, people from all across Canada and around the world joined in. And I think, to be fair, a lot of people had no idea this was going on.
Yeah, well, that was my takeaway. We're so aware of this project, but most of the world has no idea. And I think I'm hoping that in the spring we'll be able to start really doing a lot more site tours and expose people to this, because it seems like when people are presented with the sort of enormity of it, they're really astounded. And I think we've stopped being astounded in some ways because we've been living it for so many years, and we kind of assume everybody knows, but they don't.
Well, we're going to be astounded when that water starts flowing in 2024, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think it'd be useful if you can maybe, Leon, find the link and share it with
Yeah,
the
and send it
panel, because
around.
it was really good.
And if it's not obvious, Leon, I'll ask Gil to send it to us.
Sure.
Okay. I just wanted to mention that, so congrats, Chris.
Oh,
So
thanks, Paul.
we're pretty well right on time, 9:20. So we're going to introduce the first item, but I want to remind everybody that all the participants in the public session that this is being recorded and will be posted on the Waterfront Toronto website. So item 1, Queens Quay East and Cherry Street, Waterfront East LRT, Area 2B, schematic design. There will be a vote on this. And Sonia, I believe you were going to introduce this. Are you on?
Hi, everybody. Let me just share my screen.
Yep. There you go.
Can you see my screen?
Yep.
All right, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Sonia Vangeli. I'm a design project manager at Waterfront Toronto, and I'm back to present yet another piece of the East Waterfront LRT project today. Today, we'll be looking at Area 2B and 2C, highlighted in the map. So it's the extension of Queens Quay East to Cherry Street, and the extension of LRT down Cherry Street all the way to Polson Loop, a new loop at the shipping channel. This is the full scope of the East Waterfront LRT project. So previously you've reviewed Area 1, which is led by TTC, the Union to Queens Quay link. Area 2A, the surface portion of transit along Queens Quay between Bay and roughly Parliament Street, which is led by West 8 DTAH. And today we'll be looking at 2B and 2C in purple and yellow, which is led by Stantec and Public Work. As a kind of project update, we're working on all the components of the project of the East Waterfront LRT program, working on 30% preliminary design and engineering and Class 3 costing to inform a business case for implementation funding and reporting to council with that at the end of this year in December. In parallel, we're also undertaking a transit project assessment process, which is the environmental assessment for the overall LRT project to update the previous East Bayfront and Lower Donlands EAs. For this portion of the project, Area 2B and 2C, the first DRP appearance was back in June, and we're returning today for concept design. But just as an update to the project scope, we have been undertaking a transit phasing study in parallel to look at what should be the scope of phase 1, which will be the basis for the funding requests for implementation funding, the first phase of transit. And the outcomes of the study were, instead of going up Cherry North to the distillery loop for this first phase, there's greater value and lesser risk in going south along the new Cherry Street to bring transit to the Portlands, to go all the way to the shipping channel to Polson. And so the focus of this review will be on this piece of Queens Quay, the east end of Queens Quay, and the southern portion, which is essentially to add transit to the streetscape that the PLFP Cherry Street has already designed and is already under construction. So, and here you can see the overall scope of the phase 1 transit network, which would connect from Union along Queens Quay and then down to Polson. In terms of the design, the streetscape design, some of the challenges for this project are streetscape continuity and integration with a wide variety of conditions along the way. So there we have the revitalized part of Queens Quay West, the East Bayfront portion of Queens Quay, which is being designed by West DTH, and this eastern section, which is closer to the, the River District in the Portlands. Similarly with Cherry Street, we're connecting the part of Cherry that's already established in the West Donlands, going under the rail corridor and the Gardner Expressway, through the future Keating precinct, and then down into the Portlands. So there's streetscape continuity and integration with the context are really important. And obviously, we want to build on the strong identity that's already been established with Queens Quay West, and continue to build on some of the enhancements that the East Bayfront portion of Queens Quay has already started to do in terms of bringing more ecology and planting to the streetscape, and improving the clarity between the uses, cyclists, pedestrians, and finding a way to continue that identity while still responding to the context of the new district, the River District. Similarly, for Cherry Street, the team has the challenge of integrating a new transit line within a streetscape design that's already approved and already partly under construction. So this is the Cherry Street design that came to DRP a while back by DTH and WSP. And just an update on that, the design included BRT at the time, the design of Cherry Street. However, a decision was made to phase the transit to a later stage. So the scope of the streetscape that included the BRT and the east sidewalk that included green infrastructure were deferred to a future phase. And so what will actually be constructed is an interim landscape, a kind of meadow landscape with a temporary sidewalk in the meantime. And so the scope of this project on Cherry Street will be to integrate LRT infrastructure and the ultimate condition of the east sidewalk, reinstating the green infrastructure and planting. This is what that interim landscape looks like at Cherry Street at the intersection with Queens Quay. So this is Cherry, north is to the left. And obviously, the street also needs to integrate with the bridges over the Keating Channel and the future mouth of the Don. Quick update on the Cherry North transit connection. That won't be the focus of today's review, but just as an update from the last session where we had quite a lively discussion about the options. So the team is still working hard to figure out a technically feasible solution to making this connection work under the rail corridor. It's quite challenging. There's a lot of adjacent infrastructure and technical constraints here. So we're still in progress of evaluating these three options, two of which are to build a parallel portal parallel to the existing underpass, either in the red alignment or the blue alignment, that either preserve or relocate the existing Cherry Tower. And another option that goes through the existing underpass that joins mixed traffic temporarily just to get between Lakeshore and Tank House Lane to get under the rail corridor, and then join back the dedicated right-of-way. So we'll come back to DRP with this part of the project. It won't be part of today's review, but just to give you an update, this is what it looks like to the north, what we're integrating with to the north, and the south Lakeshore intersection where it also interfaces with the Gardiner. So integration with the Distillery Loop Plaza is part of the project, and with the adjacent developments. So later today, you will see Block 20 coming to DRP. So that's right adjacent to this plaza. And as a reminder, as part of that project, there was a site secured for the relocation of the Cherry Tower, but depending on what decision is made in the scope of our project, that tower is likely to remain part of this plaza, whether in its existing location or slightly shifted. So just the architectural context for the Cherry North, and then we'll also be integrating with the Lakeshore intersection to the south, and we've been coordinating with the Gardiner team to make this alignment work with the Gardiner structure. Also coordinating with previously completed studies like the Lakeshore Public Realm. Intersection improvements, as you may recall, from that study, the wider zebra markings, the paving, special paving at the intersections to make them safer and more comfortable for pedestrians. And just to say, this intersection is quite complex because it's the PLFP project meeting the Gardner Lakeshore realignment, this future waterfront LRT. So it's not an easy task. Cherry was also identified in the pedestrian and cycling connectivity study, as you may recall, as an important pedestrian and cycling connection, identifying it for potential improvements to the existing underpass and potential improvements that may come with the future LRT tunnel or LRT connection. And briefly, just the architectural context, the stormwater facility just south of the rail corridor here, and the rest of the Lakeshore Public Realm, kind of linear park east of Cherry. And the 3C PL1 development, which is the first phase of 3C's larger master plan. It's at Trinity and Queens Quay. So that's already pretty far along, and we've been coordinating grades at this intersection with that project, as well as with 3C on the bigger vision for the district at the junction of New Cherry and Queens Quay. And a quick reminder that we've given a pretty ambitious design brief to the team in terms of the aspirations for the streets. So we asked for enhanced ecological performance, enhanced mobility and clarity between uses in the street, and building a destination. So giving people a place that they want to also stay, arrive and stay, rather than just move through. And these are some of the strategies of how to do that, but they all obviously take up space in a finite width of right-of-way. So the challenge is how to balance all of these priorities. So the last time that the project came to DRP for issues ID was back in June, and we're back for concept design. These are some of the DRP comments that we got last time. So there was strong support for the ecological approach to greening the streetscape, considering the plant species that are resilient, indigenous to the site, and require little to no maintenance, given the amount of greening of the streetscape that we're aiming to do. And I'll maybe skip over the Cherry Streetcar portal because that won't be the focus of this review, but for Queens Quay, that the design really has to anticipate and plan for a very large volume of users, and adequate right-of-ways need to be provided, and the street also needs to be able to function, so the required left turns need to be preserved, while also trying to maximize space for planting. And that the streetscape design needs to be coordinated with the massing along the street and the future development. So we've been doing some of that. And that we should include more cross sections that show the massing, and a more detailed site plan indicating the various modes of traffic. So some of the areas for panel consideration today, are we achieving the right balance between our objectives for enhanced ecological performance, enhanced mobility, and placemaking? Does the proposed streetscape approach successfully stitch together all the different districts, the Central Waterfront, East Bayfront, West Almonds, Keating, and Portlands? Does the design of the extension of Queens Quay East still feel continuous with the rest of Queens Quay? On Cherry Street, do the proposed modifications and material palettes integrate well with the existing design for Cherry Street from the PLFP team and the greater waterfront context? And last but not least is the proposed planting approach, robust enough for the tough conditions of the site. Okay, and with that, I'll just briefly introduce the project team. So we also have Nigel Tahir and Brent Fairbairn from the city. Alex Mariu, my colleague at Waterfront Toronto, also managing this project, and Pina Malazzi should be here as well. And our project team, of course, Stantec and Public Work. So we have Adam Nicklin from Public Work, Mary Liston Hicks, Luke Bantol, Mark Ryan from Public Work, and Kenneth Poon from Stantec. Sorry if I've missed anyone, but in the interest of time, let's pass it on to Adam with the presentation.
Okay, thanks, Sonia. We're right on time. So Adam, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep. Yep.
Awesome.
We can see you as well.
Great. And more importantly, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Wow. Worked again. Great. Hi, everyone. Great to be back. So just a really quick recap of the premise that we discussed last time, which we think is really important in understanding the project and where it fits in the broader scheme of the central waterfront and the evolving city. This portion of Queens Quay and this stretch of Cherry is the hinge between the central waterfront and Don River Valley, but it's also the gateway between the city and the Portlands. That's super exciting. And what that kind of tells us is that this is the first time we really had an opportunity to make a streetscape which occupies and responds to the context of a river valley. It's also this kind of amazing leaping off point between being in the city proper next to the lake to actually moving through this series of islands. And I caught me a back end of a conversation about, this massive river renaturalization project. But both these streets will interface with that. That's super exciting to us. And it places it on kind of a emerging spectrum. So, when Queens Quay was originally done, it's the main street of the waterfront, and it has a particular design really tuned to that place. And then the flanks of it have a kind of a greener presence, both established by the music garden to the west, but now this evolving design by West 8 in detail, which builds in more ecology within a similar design. Our opportunity is to, again, just evolve and tweak that design a little bit further to recognize the context of this river climax. And to us, that means taking the same materials, which again, just to remind everyone, the foundation of the materials were always the kind of expression in an urban form of the naturalized materials that we find on Canadian and Ontario waterfronts, granite, wood, but building them into an urban presence. And now as we kind of progress towards the east, you find yourself on this spectrum towards what we hope with this design is very familiar in terms of the way that we use materials, but also new in terms of more immersive forest ecologies and a very absorbent landscape. This is a performative landscape. So the central core having this presence of like a hardscape with very finely crafted materials that set the bar high for leading with landscape in the waterfront. Taking that same craftsmanship and just tuning it to in a different way, and then adding this new layer of a more immersive ecology and a performative landscape. It's maybe, hopefully, its fullest expression in the East End. Okay, we'll start with Cherry Street. We're going to talk a bit more about south of tracks, because as Sonia suggested, there's still technical work to be done to the north, and we'll come back with that. But for now, what we're wondering about is how we get cohesion at this point, which a lot of different things come together. And one of the kind of, I guess I'd say, considerations for us is understanding the zones of influence in terms of this position in the city. So Cherry is moving between a lot of different really established palettes, the West Donlands, the distillery, and Cherry itself, north of the tracks, the Gardner and Lakeshore corridor, which now has a very established language, which the panel's seen. And then the primary waterfront of Queens Quay and the Water's Edge Promenade. The pink line kind of represents this really interesting, exciting inflection where this is the first time you cross water and you're coming over the soon to be, newly revitalized Keating Channel over the amazing bridge. And then you start hopping between these islands and new districts within the Portlands. We've never had this before in Toronto, or at least not in a really tangible way that people have kind of understood. So that's super exciting. These are the kind of images of, I think Sonia showed these already, but the Portlands is already kind of coming up with an established language of like poured concrete like the city standard, but tweaked to be better, with sandblast finishes and kind of robust detailing and green ecology. The distillery in Cherry, north of the tracks, everyone kind of gets that already. It's a warm brick language. It's both historic but also contemporary. It's been used in beautiful contemporary ways by a lot of buildings, as this panel's actually seen. And then the West Donlands and Queens Quay and the Water's Edge Promenade, they, I guess, employ a contemporary version of a kind of a very traditional, timeless landscape. So, materials are used in like a unit paver form, typically, like ideally granite, sometimes concrete. So that, because in street conditions, you're subject to a lot of rebuild as utilities are dug up and placed back. So this allows it to be kind of reconfigured and put back together in the way you found it. So those are the things we're working with. Those are the influences. South of the Keating, you've already seen this design, or at least you've seen the drawings of it. This is our rendering of it, which shows that the temporary version of Cherry south of the Keating employs this language of sandblasted concrete walks. It has an asphalt trail, but it's a beautiful, nice, wide, tree-lined, multi-use trail. The roadbed supports both, regular cars, but also the bus rapid transit. The placeholder for the LRT, which we're now designing in, was designed in a meadow landscape, and that's pretty cool, right? And hard to take away from people in the future. And so we don't think we should. So when we add the LRT, we think it should be a greenway in the spirit of the meadowway that was the placeholder for it. We'll talk a bit about the conversations we've had with the TTC and Fire and EMS on that a bit later in the slideshow. But essentially, the other aspects of the language we intend to just keep the same. It's been designed and reviewed here. So south of Keating, we think our main contribution is to maybe introduce a little bit more green ecology, but also the green track. Then looking at the bigger picture, it's kind of promising to us that the green track could then be a really kind of unifying feature all the way down Cherry. Maybe we could even get it in time with the addition of a new bridge over the shipping channel all the way down to Cherry Beach. So that's exciting to us that becomes this unifying ecological kind of consistent element. But then we look at the kind of knuckle between the distillery and West Donlands and then south of the tracks down towards the Keating, and we wonder, like, what's the solution for there that kind of brings this together in a harmonious way, celebrates this juncture between city and Portlands, and does it without adding too much kind of extra fuss. So, one way, of course, is we could just, hop the language over from Cherry south. But we do find that when we draw that, it kind of makes a lot of different things. It almost kind of breaks this waterfront palette integrity at the opportunity where, you want to tie a lot of things together, including Queens Quay, the Water's Edge Promenade. So we're wondering about two models. One is that, okay, the image at the top right, hopefully everyone here knows there's a kind of an established language of using it. It's like a tumbled concrete paver called a Paleotech unit paver. And it's been used for all the interior streets of the central waterfront and East Bayfront. So it's a very familiar language which interfaces with Queens Quay. That could go on Cherry as well. So you'd attach or wrap Cherry onto this kind of north, south, and east, west street language. It's one version, but it could make a lot of sense. Another one is that, every time there's like a major street occurrence, such as, Parliament, or over here on Munition, where, we have the opportunity that Queens Quay actually joins back onto the Water's Edge Promenade, we employ the granite. So, the Water's Edge and the Queens Quay become almost as one at these very significant moments. And we think Cherry could be one of them too. So there could be an opportunity here to wrap the language of Queens Quay down onto Cherry, keep the continuity of the already established garden or lakeshore, and just wrap it down a little bit just to interface with Queens Quay here, and then tie the waterfront together. The culmination and kind of expression then being the bridge which leads you to the Portlands. So deploy the kind of lower Cherry version with concrete sidewalks. It would have looked like this with the interim solution in the Meadowway. What we're now wondering about is these two models I'm using, either the Paleotech kind of district paver on the sidewalks of Cherry and the green track, or this is the version where we wrap Queens Quay and lock it into the Water's Edge Promenade. Keen to get your thoughts. Oh, and we're not going to talk much about the north side, but you did make a really good comment last time that we thought we should at least address. But, we had this idea, not one of our most complex, about Cherry Street having cherries. And we talked about maybe, or hinted at a monoculture. We think the idea is exciting, but yeah, why would we do that? That doesn't seem like a completely contemporary response to an ecology on a street. So we're actually wondering about a really diverse spectrum of flowering fruit trees, not all cherries, some of them would be. The neat thing there is that instead of that being that one moment where you would go and you'd see the street in bloom, you could go anywhere between April and October and see different moments where different ones of these trees were showing off amazing foliage or flowers. And, also that gives us more resiliency in terms of not depending on one monoculture. Jumping to Queens Quay. We just wanted to kind of give a graphic sense to what we talked about in terms of a spectrum of both continuity of the street, but also these kind of setting off points of different nuances we head towards the east and into the river valley. So this is the established approach. This is a representative block of the established approach to the Queens Quay you already know because it's built. If you lift the tree canopy away, it's really like this. It has the double-sided bench and a row of trees, the sidewalk on the south with the mosaic, and on the north, and then the typical concrete track and the asphalt roadway. The way you asked as well about how you circulate the street. In terms of how you move as a pedestrian, and we should say as a bike as well. You move in a kind of traditional way, it's designed as a cross section and it's extruded. So you have this kind of very linear, equal width flow of kind of movement along it. So it's very much, it's a movement street, as it should be. There's a lot of people there. And here in the East Bayfront, the Westgate Detail Evolving Design starts to build in, it's the same kind of circulation, but it has these kind of new moments of ecology between the Martin Goodman Trail and the track, and also on the north side where the north side sidewalk is. So it starts to add texture, ecology, and also water capture. which we think is great. Remember, circulation works in a similar way. Depending on which block you're on, it typically has a width between 3 and 5 meters, the area you see in purple. So what we're looking at when we kind of get to this kind of climax in the river valley is that we have this approach to ecology which ranges from formal at the intersections into something really more diverse and immersive as you move into the river district. That's realized both in tree canopy, also on the ground though. And obviously the green track's a big part of that, but also these native kind of planting zones, and using granite in both its cultivated and carved form, but also its natural form. So this is the first time we introduced natural granite shapes within the spectrum of the Queen's Quay language. And the way that it works as circulation is that, you know, we have at least the minimum width you'd find anywhere else on Queen's Quay, but sometimes way more, up to 6.5 meters, but it works as an ebb and flow. So instead of taking the logic of, you know, well, like, you know, vehicles and streetcars, they move in lines, and they kind of, they're on tracks, they're similar size. Humans, if we take seriously the notion of a street being a place, then we want to create this kind of ebb and flow, this kind of meander, which makes you feel like you're not on a conveyor belt, but you can actually step off and you can stay a while and you can enjoy the street truly as a place. So, you know, placemaking then isn't just finer materials, it's actually different ways of occupying the place in the same way as you might do a park. Here's the plans. They were included in your package. So you can see where, you know, the 2A teams kind of work, dovetails in at Silo, and there's, you know, what you're seeing on the park over here is really just representative of, you know, an idea, but that'll be a different process. You'll see that come through at a later date as a park design. But you can see now we're starting to really flush out the transportation design. The good news is that, you know, circulation in terms of left turn lanes, but to keep traffic moving on this kind of local street condition, we can still fit a lot of the things that we talked about in terms of green ecology. And you can also see how we've started to marry the north side and south side. So instead of like all the fun being on the south side, and that's the kind of park connection, we really want to bring a flavor of the ecology and placemaking to the north side as well. So that we're taking the entire cross section and delivering it in a manner that feels elevated. Some quick views. This is coming from the south through the mid-block connection, which will hopefully be really kind of lively and occupiable. This is just coming out of a mid-block connection and turning slightly to the west. You can see the granite outcrop seating. We talked about this last time, how it kind of comes from a carved form and into an outcrop form. The outcrop being on the east as it points towards the river valley. The tree planting you can see is very much more kind of immersive and dynamic. Smaller species taking off quickly, established species following them as light becomes available. So you'll see different things each time you visit here. Still a lot of people, still a lot of space, and still a lot of interaction, we hope. And a view kind of looking more towards the west. This is maybe the kind of climax of the planting where you actually get it both sides. You so rarely get that on the street. We think that's really exciting, and also encouraging spots for people to be able to sit on Queen's Quay and within the mid-block as well. So just packing a lot of life into the place. And here, maybe on the right, just showing how the landscape can be both immersive and textural, but also occupiable. Taking a really proactive approach to the seasons, not just hiding from them or kind of covering them or, you know, providing shelter, but you know, respecting the kind of cadence of the seasons, the Canadian winter, using the micro topography and the kind of more textured street, not just for, you know, a vessel for green, but also a place where you can actually appreciate the form of nature and maybe even better when it's winter, because you truly see the form of a tree, and you see the outcrops, and it maybe just gives a little bit more of textural relief to the times when you don't have the foliage on the trees. Similarly here. So again, just accepting winter as a positive, and thinking how much we like parks in the winter, and we appreciate them for different reasons than we do in the summer. Applying that same logic and optimism to the design of a street. Okay, so on ecology, the reason it's sometimes hard to talk about it in terms of streets is that the design of streets has historically always been about accommodating different uses of predominantly movement and also servicing underneath the street. So we like ecology and we like to talk about it, but it's usually the thing that we'll put if we have space. And when space is taken up by the other uses, then it usually takes the first hit. So in order to be successful here, we think we need to look at holding ourselves to account, and maybe beyond what we would usually have to do in a typical street kind of situation. So the city's been really proactive in this, and they're actually starting to put requirements in place for TGS up to tier 3 of what you would do with a street project. But we feel that here in the waterfront, where we lead with landscape, if the landscape leads, then it should meet the same requirements that you put on every development that will front onto this street. So TGS tier 3 is a requirement by Waterfront Toronto's green standards. And cut a long story short, if we were tier 3 with the streets as well, we would be trying to capture essentially all of the runoff from the street through ecological means, and we would be capturing the first 25 millimeters of flow, which is essentially anything that may be polluted by things that, you know, come off of vehicle use. So it looks something like this. We probably have 4 zones of water capture. The sidewalk zone in zone 4, the kind of northern part of the bikeway, and the southern part of the streetcar in zone 3, and then the 2 which encapsulate the north sidewalk and the roadbed. So we have devices and ways, which you've already seen in the plans and rendering, of capturing water from all of these zones, putting them to ground. This is really simple stuff, by the way. I mean, if you were to drive along an Ontario highway, you would see what we call bioswales in the city, you know, really just kind of, you know, rolled landscape which captures water. But here we can do it in a really urban form. It's exciting because it's didactic. People can relate to it and they can understand the passage of water, not just from a hard surface into a catch basin, but from a hard surface into a landscape. And suffice to say, we're on track right now. We think we can capture about 25 millimeters of water. The street looks something like this, so it still accommodates all the same movement and usage that we have in all the other areas of the street along Queens Quay. And we want to also implement a monitoring so we can tell, like if this is an exemplary example of a green street in the waterfront, then let's see how it's performing. So there's a firm called Octi that we've reached out to who have water quality sensoring that we can build in at the outset. And then we can actually see how the street's performing and also make adjustments if we want to optimize its performance. And that would be both moisture capture and also salt, something we hope we won't use in the future, but we do use now. That leads us to the planting design, which, you know, is all resilient and indigenous. It really has to be to kind of live in this kind of environment. Here's some examples of the kind of textures you might see. And here's the plants we're using. So maybe 2 things to know. Like, one is that we're planting them in a way, you could also, you should look at this too and see the kind of things we're using, but we're planting them in a way that we're not trying to maintain them as they were implemented in day 1. So sometimes, you know, you see a garden, it's a very designed environment, and half the effort in maintaining it is keeping it the way you wanted it in the first place. Here we're choosing plants which will colonize in different ways. And because we provided a landscape that has kind of micro topography and slightly different sun aspects in terms of where they relate to the street geometry, that the things that we plant, we expect they'll kind of shift their territory slightly, both by spreading to where they're happiest and, you know, where stronger plants meet weaker plants, but also self-seeding themselves. So these will be things that you'll actually probably be familiar from your garden, but sometimes you'll find they spring up in another place because they've actually seeded themselves. So we don't want to take a heavy-handed approach to maintenance here where we have a set idea of what it is, but we want to see a dynamic evolution of a really naturalized planting indigenous street condition. We're excited to see where it will take us. We're also excited about studying with RWDI, hopefully a bigger update next time, but some preliminary studies about how these kind of street environments, instead of just having the kind of lollipop trees every 10 meters where you get some wind protection, but you definitely will notice drafts that make it through the canopy. Here, the more diverse planting systems give you a little bit of relief, both in terms of wind. Again, we're not trying to recreate an indoor environment here, so we want to also celebrate the fact that you feel a breeze on you and that you can actually put a coat on rather than, you know, being in the path system. But we also know that sun capture becomes optimized because you have trees all around you, so you can get amazing kind of dappled shade in the summer, but also in the winter, you still, because you have these kind of asymmetrical tree conditions, that the branch structure still provides that little bit of relief just to bring it into a more comfortable shoulder season environment. We're really keen to keep working with developments adjacent to think of not the building as the edge, but also the beginning and the landscape of the beginning of the interior. There's really a lot of overlap. Comfort as well to us is going to mean more than just thermal comfort, but also, you know, you're seeing the long bench seating we put in. We've very purposely chosen the version with the back. So if we're talking about streets as a place, then we want people to stay longer. So instead of having the backless bench, we want to encourage people to relax. We're also now going to be looking, but we want to involve the original team with West 8 and DTAR in terms of whether we could even include a rest on this bench so that it makes people a bit more able to be able to settle down into it and push themselves out. And also making sure we have spaces within the constellation, which you can see just to the left here, for people who have mobility aids or wheelchairs that want to sit in the same manner underneath the canopy of the trees. Thinking about how the landscape feels from a bike, we made a few tweaks in terms of how much space we give to the bench, just a bit more breathing room, but also how the landscape feels from the TTC and what your experience is as a transit rider. A few little tweaks from last time. We heard some good commentary from Claude about making sure we never got too narrow with the planters, and that makes a lot of sense. We'd actually widened this one out. You remember it had a longer kind of narrow tip. And we're also now studying whether at the intersections, we keep the kind of cadence of maybe the more formal landscape of Queen's Quay, and both central and east. And as we move further to the east, then these kind of naturalized planting zones maybe occupy the territory just beyond the intersection. So when we get this super wide circulation off of the intersection and we get a little bit more room for bike parking and bike share, this is the version before where we integrate both. We do like this notion of, you know, here having the bike way framed within a landscape, but we also recognize the kind of practical need to park a lot of bikes and maybe have bike share as well. So we think, or we hope, this maybe strikes the right kind of balance. Looking at the north side, this is a view north towards the mid-block between Cherry and Trinity. And here we're starting to wonder about bringing the language of ecology and water capture to the north side, which it hasn't had before. And it would essentially be a series of weirs and rock outcrop. And again, you can see that formal planting gives way to more kind of pioneer species arrangement in the middle of a block versus the intersections. How it would look from the sidewalk, the more kind of formal planting here, and then the more pioneer species. This is the bioswale on the north side. This is super important because otherwise we really can't capture the north side roadbed through ecological means. So this plays a huge role performatively on the street. Few more views. And then we're now looking at how we can also include some pick up and drop off that would provide access to the block to the north. So we have a few models we're considering. One is where we break the bioswale in the middle and have kind of 2 equal parts either side, or another where we put the pick up and drop off on the east side. So then we get this more continuous, bigger bioswale. Both have merit. So, you know, welcome your thoughts. And we think that it, you know, it doesn't really change the feeling of the street. It's still a positive contribution. You get a nice balance of the ecological aspects, but also the kind of practical ones of a pick up and drop off. We do think, though, this would be just pick up and drop off, not parking. There's no sense in taking up this space and then plugging it up with one car for the whole day. Quick kind of check back in on the green track progress. Some examples. We're showing particularly examples of, we're getting more and more excited about the notion of using not just grass and using kind of more resilient planting, which is drought resistant. So mixes of sedums, a bit more texture and a bit more color as well to boot. And this one isn't in Europe. You're looking at Scarborough. How cool is that? So this is the Eglinton LRT. If anyone has any time right now to go up to, I'd say a good spot is Eglinton and Warden. You can go and see the impact just this very simple move has on a predominantly concrete and asphalt simple streetscape. It's a joy. And what really surprised us in a super positive way is that I think I'd mentioned before that we'd actually done some work in terms of working with Metrolinx to put in a minimum requirement of 3 kilometers of grass track. The successful bidder actually included 5.5 kilometers. So they went over and above the terms of the brief, and that tells us that it's both cheaper to implement, but also cheaper to maintain over the 30-year period of time that they have to finance, own, operate, and maintain it. In Queens Quay and Cherry, we're thinking a really significant and exciting move would be to go all the way through from the Young Street portal over to Polson. But we know that's asking a lot. So then, you know, what would be the next kind of best thing? Well, you know, Parliament is a very kind of natural break point. It's the last slip in the inner harbour. So the goal we've really been talking to the TTC about is, can we do the River District? Can we actually make Queens Quay as a green track and also Cherry all the way down to the loop? We don't think we can green the loop because there has to be turning space for buses as well. But that would be a really significant and meaningful outcome of our conversations, which I must say the TTC is approached in a really positive way, the city divisions as well. And Fire and EMS, we're really clear on their requirements and what they need, and there'll be challenges in meeting them, but you know, we remain optimistic, and we have to be, because it was only optimism that got us over the line on Eglinton. we can reinforce the green track, which will give more opportunity for people to be able to use it, but maybe not all the time. For instance, you know, the TTC needs to run interim bus service on it, and it may be too much frequency of usage for this to bear the brunt of all of that. But it still may be a useful thing to have in terms of being able to maintain the track or the overhead. So something that we're perfectly prepared to build in as well, and is pretty established technology. We've used it a bunch of times before. The other reason that the green track is really relevant, of course, and I think we hinted at this last time, is that there is a huge amount of embedded carbon in terms of making a concrete track, and we both get around that in terms of the original implementation for building a green track, saving about 500 odd metric tons of carbon, but also the sedum sequesters carbon. So if we can put in place something that is, you know, an ecological solution, it keeps giving back in those terms. And yeah, that's it. That's it. Turn it over to comments and discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Adam, for a very comprehensive presentation. So we're going to go to questions from the panel, and I'll just go down the list of panel members. Do you want to kick it off, Betsy?
You know, I've got no questions, but this is also not my primary area of expertise. So maybe throw it over to Nina Marie and Fatty to begin.
No, that's exactly the plan. So
and wonderful presentation, Adam. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Fatty, are you there?
Sorry. I'm here. I just have one really quick question. This was so incredibly comprehensive. About the meadow landscape, is it envisioned to be completely successional, or is there a management regime for it?
There would be, we think, a light management scheme for it. Yeah. So I guess I would classify it as, or clarify it as like a guiding hand, but not an oppressive one. So, you know, it would be a less intense version than a formal garden, but still kind of a monitoring approach, and maybe kind of like seeing how different species do, and maybe deploying or cutting back.
Okay, Nina Marie?
I'm laughing because, of course, Fadi and I have hive mind, and so that was my question. I just would add that as someone who knows something about meadows and how people tend to complain about them, I think the guiding hand is essential. So thank you for answering that question. I have no others.
No? Okay.
Yeah. Oh, I should also just confirm that it's not a meadow. The meadow is what would have gone on Cherry Street in the interim before the LRT, and now the approach is to do the LRT day one. So not meadow, but it is. So the planting you're seeing here would be shrubby or herbaceous, and it would still get the guiding hand, but it wouldn't be a meadow. And the green track, if we did it, we hope would be sedum. Just to clarify.
Yeah, that's actually well, to say that I didn't have another question, it was assuming that in the options you showed, if the temporary meadow landscape were there, that would have been the question. But I understand now that the options you discussed are actually replacing that, which I think is a much better idea for reasons that why you chose it, I think. So thanks. Yeah, and the shrubby overstory that's stratified is what I'm understanding it, or how I'm reading that option. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Jana? Any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. It was a great presentation. Like Betsy, it's not my primary area of expertise, but I do have one question, and that's about the Opti monitoring system. It seems like a great idea, and I'm wondering whether that's achievable in this scope of work, or whether this is something you have to advocate to increase the scope.
No, it's achievable. It's not huge cost if done up front. It's actually not even big cost. It's a very reasonable thing to put in compared to the kind of scale of this project. It's almost insignificant cost-wise. It's just harder to do later because you're digging up and you're retrofitting. So that's why we're looking at it now.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. Pat?
Yeah, question about the guiding hand. Who is that guiding hand? Is that City of Toronto? For the planting beds? It would be the city. And then are there sort of two bench typologies that you're talking about, the ones with the back and then the large slabs of stone? Is that kind of the two over the?
Yeah. So yeah, the guiding hand of maintenance and upkeep is, yeah, it's probably the city. Interestingly, the city has teams of gardeners for major streets such as University Avenue, and they also, have dedicated teams for City Hall, Nathan Phillips Square, and Metro, for instance. And if you stop to chat to these people, and I encourage people to, they love their work, and they're not like your typical city worker. They have a sense of ownership and pride, and they love that people love their work. And then in terms of the benches, in terms of formal seating, we're using a longer version of the backed one that you would also see on the Waterfront Promenade. So you could actually, if you went to the Waterfront Promenade now, you'd see the back bench. This would just be longer. We'd like to work with the first team in terms of incorporating an arm, just to make it even more comfortable and usable by all age groups and abilities. And then I guess the rock is like a seat, but it's a territory that's really informal and can be sat on, but isn't specifically shaped as one.
And is it would you get granite, like the granite outcropping that's at Sugar Beach, or the big granite rock that's at Cumberland Park, or are you thinking limestone, or any thoughts on what it would be?
Yeah, it'd be granite. So we'd match the granite which has already been used within Queen's Quay, which I think is Cambrian. But yeah, granite, not limestone. A Canadian shield, essentially.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Pat. Jeff, are you there? Jeff? No.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Oh, there you are. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Any questions, Jeff?
Yeah, just looking at this image, I'm just sort of curious about the edge condition of the bike path here. So it looks like it's a drop off. Is that sort of like a roll, just like a roll curb into the planted areas? And I'm just not knowing about this, but just for safety considerations with a bike path having a drop off along the edge, is that standard, or does there need to be some sort of curb protection?
Yeah, it's not evident on the rendering, but there is actually a curb which faces in towards the bike path. And then in order to get the water across, there's like a little kind of scupper detail. I think it's probably in the drawing package that we sent, but it doesn't show up at this scale. Yeah.
Okay, appreciate that. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Kevin?
Thank you very much. Do we have much influence over the concrete mix? I really enjoy, the carbon content calculation. Not enjoy, but appreciate the carbon content calculation you did. What lot of concrete in here, even irrespective of the plantings. Can we modify that mix for, like a lot of SEMs, lowering the carbon content of the Portland? Is that possible?
Yeah, it's possible. We're hoping to limit the use of concrete entirely, though, to just foundations. So primary walking surfaces will be granite. We have asphalt on the trail. That's a Martin Goodman's kind of standard. But then all edge conditions would be granite. The track would be, yes, concrete foundations. Yeah, absolutely, we could. But then mostly, green systems. And then we're wondering about the roadbed actually being a concrete unit paver, again, using the paleotech from the inner street language of the waterfront.
Okay, thanks. Matthew, any questions?
Yeah, thank you so much. Very fantastic to see all this work. I had one question, and this may not be in your scope of work or purview, but thinking about underground utilities, and maybe if you slide to slide number 20, can use that as an example. Has there been any thought about where the placement of utilities may go, including water mains or electrics or hydro? Sorry, one back maybe. Your slides might be different than mine. Yeah, something like this. Where would we place? Have you thought about where we would place that in a cross section?
Adam, you want me to take
it keeps moving. I pressed it a ton of times and now it's trying to catch up with me. It's just nerves. Still moving, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. I'll just answer.
Yeah, just answer, Adam.
So yeah, it's a complete street redesign. So we get to place things where we want them and away from things that we don't want to be disturbed. The other nice thing is that, I mean, inevitably you have to dig things up occasionally and eventually. But if we're predominantly using a kind of unit paver strategy, you can replace it again without getting that kind of weird patina of patches and different kind of reinstatement of things like concrete and asphalt. But yeah, definitely we're thinking hard about where we want servicing.
Okay. That's great to hear.
Okay, Bridget?
Yes, I just had one question, and I'm not sure whether this is for Adam or for Sonia. Adam described this hinge between the city and the Portlands, but there was kind of nothing about commissioners further east, which is really, the Portlands area. Whether it's not in the scope or not, but does this kind of create a future connection eastward, or is it, you describe clearly the scope of, Union Station, Queens Quay East, Cherry Street North, this being south, but there was not any mention by anyone about future commissioners east. And I just wondered what, the status of that was, and whether that is something that is anticipated, even though it may not be in a specific scope right now.
Yeah, I can answer that. So the commissioners and Broadview connection are envisioned as a future phase of the East Waterfront LRT project, but they are not part of the current scope to take it to 30%. The current scope is focused on phase 1 of
and that's just this kind of turning circle just at the shipping channel.
Yeah, exactly. Polson Loop.
And in the end, there was I guess Adam brought up the potential of actually seeing something like this extend to Cherry Beach. Is that kind of just yet a future phase to be determined, or is that something where you could see this as one stop on the way to Cherry Beach?
As far as I know, I'm not sure that the extension to Cherry Beach is part of the what's been planned as the Waterfront LRT project. I think the eastern extension to East Harbor Station is the further phase. So I don't know that there would necessarily be LRT extension to Cherry Beach, but it's something that we can take back and discuss.
Okay, thank you very much. That's my question.
Okay, thanks, Bridget. Peter, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I just wondered whether the meadow planting on the future BRT, there are trees shown in the kind of developed view. Could those trees be planted in the short term rather than waiting for the LRT installation so that they grow up and they add to the canopy?
Yeah, the idea is, and Sonia can correct me if I get the details wrong, but that it would all be built up front, so we wouldn't have to wait for the LRT, all going well with the LRT study, that this would be the day one condition.
Actually, we don't know if that's going to be the case, because it all depends on when this project will be funded. So as you know, PLFP is already funded and under construction. So there may be a scenario in which the meadow goes in first as an interim condition, and then our project comes along and replaces it. In the ideal scenario, we would do it right from the start, but it all depends on when this project gets funded.
But I was thinking meadow plus trees rather than just meadow.
Yeah, I think the difficulty there is the damage to the trees when the LRT infrastructure gets put in. So that's why the decision was made to defer the build out of that east public realm.
Yeah,
you might be able to do the west side though, Peter.
Oh,
to your
west
point,
side
you could do the west side. Yeah.
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 Okay. Okay.
The west
Any
side
other
isn't.
questions, Peter? Okay. George?
Yes. I'm not sure this sounds like I may just have misunderstood. Could you go to the slide, which is the plan of the section of Queens Quay between Trinity and Cherry? I think it was slide 32 or around there.
Try and do it successfully this time.
Okay. All right. I think I've already seen the answer to my question. When this first went by, I didn't pick up the row of trees right next to the curb. I only saw the second row further back. And then if you go to, so I'm just making sure I understand this. The condition which is drawn in plan here, and then if you go to slide 54, right, is that showing the same? Is that rendering showing the same location as we were looking at on the plan, or at least a similarly typical location?
Yeah, it's a zoom, and what you're not seeing on this is the next row of trees back because it's within the pops, but there is another row like here. And you also don't see the formal rows on either side because we're zoomed in a bit too far. So you just see the kind of more immersive planting, which is the mid block. Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's you've answered my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else with any questions before we move to comments?
This is Eric. You haven't asked me, but I have no question.
Okay. Yeah, you're conflicted only on item number 2, correct, Eric?
Correct.
Okay, yeah. Okay, great. Okay, so let's move to comments. I'll start off with Nina Marie.
Well, thank you very much. First, Adam, just to say, as usual, this is such an incredibly comprehensive and thoughtful presentation. And I don't know if this has ever been said before, but it's worth saying now that the calm pace and reflective way in which you're presenting very complex work is really important to our understanding, and it's so appreciated. It's also a very confident and prepared kind of reflection on what is different. And that's so important here at DRP. So I just want to start by thanking you for that. In the interest of time, I'll just try and go through my comments based on how you presented. And the first thing to say is, you know, I've already mentioned the complexity, but I'm not sure that everyone understands that this work that takes place above and below ground at grade and through a landscape is so incredibly difficult because so much of it is not visible, or it's visible 10 years later. So it's a very, very hard thing to do and to do well. And I would really say that integrating transit with green infrastructure, where there is a requirement for functionally performative ecology, so living systems that have to work alongside the primary goal of moving people safely and comfortably with a good experience through public space, is super critical. And you've really done that with the way in which you've chosen to share that experience with us, sometimes by stripping out the things that maybe draw our attention, right? The things that we have to actually look at, the servicing, the cross-section of what's below grade and so on. The other thing to say is, that this is, as you've mentioned, I want to highlight my appreciation for the landscape and a street are together a place. We forget that. It's been so often overlooked and poorly understood. And here we really have a chance, again, at DRP, where Waterfront Toronto is really leading with landscape, then yes, we're doing it by creating a place. And that's what you've shown us, is this kind of culture of nature in a place that we want to stop, sit, reflect, whether it's looking through the window of the TTC or whether it's reminding us that in winter, this place can be something to celebrate, not just to commiserate about. From a technical point of view, this is such a thorough presentation. I just wanted to go through the options. I think if I understood correctly, and Fadi may follow up with this, the meadow on Ontario Street, which is a temporary placeholder, I understand now is we're moving. My understanding was that there's been this kind of very positive negotiation discussion with the city and with TTC around the green track, where this is now we're going to be seeing this more storied, stratified vegetation, a kind of shrub-dominated landscape together with a green track. And if that option is how we're understanding it, I think that's really essential. The green track in particular, I think we know you've been championing this from the beginning. You've had a lot of support from us, I think, on DRP, and it's great to know that there's a pilot project, if we can call it that, in Scarborough that some of us know about, but we'd really love to see this here at the maximum amount of track available, even in that first phase, and that you are looking at sedum in addition to what some people would just say is kind of an astroturf-like condition, even though it's living turf grass. The sedum, and frankly, even in some cases, we're seeing colonization with lichens. I mean, it could be a very, very interesting track experience, especially because the conditions in winter are so harsh. And I think we have such good research from the Grit Lab at U of T, from the Ryerson Rooftop Lab, where sedum explorations in these tough conditions can really offer good confidence in selecting that. So I really hope that will come to bear, and it sounds very positive. So full steam ahead on that one. I really appreciate the celebrating of that, or talking about it around urban heat island reduction, the carbon sequestration, as well as the stormwater capture is so important. I mean, you're hitting 3 sustainable development goals at the municipal level right there, which is fantastic and really worth telling in that story, not to mention that it looks and feels great from a pedestrian experience. The flowering fruit trees, I just want to comment on that. I really appreciate that you took in those comments around last time, that while it's such a beautiful display in spring, I really think the monoculture is not the way to go. I so appreciate an emphasis on diversity, particularly with the native fruit trees, the malus species that are bird friendly, they're pollinator friendly. You're putting the performance value first and really hedging your bets against difficult climate conditions with a more diverse strategy that, as you point out, we get flowering from spring through fall. We get foliage differentiation. It's a very beautiful thing to put in place. So I'm very supportive of that. Just to wrap up the comments quickly, the stormwater capture, I think, is so essential. We know that the province, at least under the previous government, had really moved towards a 90% on-site capture, but to be doing it at the extent we're doing it in transit here and really showing that story, puts the performative money in place. It really justifies the space, particularly when you show that landscape in cross-section, that it's not just about the tree canopy, but actually about that whole cross-section from curb to center track, to the swales, to the seating areas, that these are all performing around stormwater capture is critical. The planting strategy, I have no comments other than to say it's great. You guys really know what you're doing. You've looked at really robust and resilient species. You know, your seeding succession, which is the right approach in a place like this where we want that thickness, that thick green edge to be at its climax at the intersection of the new river and the channel. We've zoomed out before, and I know with you in previous presentations, to really emphasize that the importance, the nexus of this connection that connects the greenbelt to the lakefront fundamentally. And here is where you're bringing, you know, thousands of people through that green strip. It should be a different experience. It should be showing what that river is doing, and that planting strategy will, I believe, will get at that. The final comment is just on maintenance and monitoring with a landscape like this, which will be so critical to celebrate its success, frankly, and to adjust and tweak direction where necessary. I don't know whether you've already had these discussions with the city, but I feel like it needs a handbook from you, the way MVVA did with Corktown Common. The maintenance staff are not the problem, as you point out. They love their jobs. It's that translation of what the guiding hand looks like from the designer to the maintainer to the monitor. And while it's great that, you know, you're looking at systems like Opti, I feel like your university neighbors are great partners in helping to, you know, evaluate landscape performance in really critical ways so that we make sure the vision is realized and the evolution is captured in terms of what it's doing, that seeded succession, that stormwater capture, and so on. Thank you so much. It was a really robust presentation. You have my full support in what is really putting leading with landscape into action.
Great, thanks, Nina Marie. Fadi?
Yeah, thank you so much. I just, in the interest of time, just want to reinforce and reiterate everything Nina Marie just mentioned. I agree fully and completely. My couple of just observational comments too, as a case study for other projects to look at, is it's kind of amazing how in every single rendering you see the tree canopy not as a rubber stamp. It's not, you know, you mentioned not a lollipop, but it's really incredible because it just shows the seriousness and rigor that you actually took into thinking about how plants grow asymmetrically, right? They have different branching techniques. They have different, you know, foliage qualities. And, you know, that really comes across. And it's a really incredible case study in street design where we're not looking at streets as trees as objects, but as living things that they themselves create the experience for both the pedestrians, but also the city at large, you know? So this is obviously not the Champs-Élysées, never will and never should be. So the trees should never look like they're the same object just repeating themselves. But what that's telling me is that there's an incredible care and there is serious research being put in on how the plants and the trees at large create the street experience. And I think this is something really worth just, you know, highlighting and putting in the foreground. Couple of really quick things that I think maybe I'm curious to know more about. It's not a comment in any way. It's more about where these ebbs and jetties or outcrops correspond to mid-block circulation. I see them popping up a few places, but I would really, as this project moves forward, I think it'd be really amazing to understand them in relation to the building's entrances and exits, as well as ground level programs, right? So if there's, you know, retail nearby or restaurant, like, how does the streetscape itself begin to correspond with the circulation in and out of buildings, as well as sun shade analysis of some sort? You know, I think it would be amazing for these seating and gathering areas to also be directly corresponding to the location of not just the presence of commercial or retail or restaurants or other activities at ground, but also seasonal comfort, you know, shade in the summer, sun in the winter, etc., so that they're not random. I don't know if they are or not, but that they become just as intentional as the planting. And lastly, I'm also would love to see just a little bit more of what, you know, the successional drama of the project unfolding over time, right? So the renderings are kind of showing a what's it called, a kind of finished product at some point, but I think that there's going to be some incredible in between moments that are also worth rendering and visualizing as well. But fantastic work. This is really, really just absolutely incredible. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Fadi. Eric?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for your excellent presentation. I won't. I agree with my previous two colleagues. I won't repeat their comments, but I totally agree with them. I think that the plan continues to, in my view, what's great is continue to enhance that experience of the waterfront. It continue to advance the excellence and sustainability and resiliency in the waterfront, and I think that in my view, it continues to set lesson and set the bar for the rest of the city about how we need to continue to look at the landscape. If from I'll touch on some of the key points that were asked. There was a question on the material palette in terms of for Cherry Street. I do, just from my own perspective, the palette that wraps the waterfront and brings it down into Cherry to the Keaton Channel and create that area, I think to me is quite logical. So to continue the palette there up to the Keaton Channel, I think it, from an experience perspective, I think it's quite logical. It's quite sensitive, and it really ties in that piece of the waterfront. Just to build on the comment, the Queen's Quay planting, I do like the idea of creating those larger planting area. I think that is actually something that's quite positive from an experience perspective. As mentioned, I think the key is to the minimization of maintenance in terms of how this is treated. On a bit of a detail part, I like the bench with the back. I am not as much of a big fan or, as supportive for the extraordinary long bench. I think that, I wouldn't want them necessarily to act as barrier. I think so. Those have to be looked very carefully. I think that breaking them and creating various smaller, more intimate space is something that should be considered. And also they need to be coordinated with destination in terms of where exactly are they placed. So that's something that, as the design continues, that's become something quite important. The bike path, I think that I like the idea of these kind of big planting area along the bike path between the pedestrian and the bike path. I think something to keep in mind and continue to look at is that there's probably needs to be a few gaps sometimes for pedestrian to be able to come in and out to reach destination. So in terms of not forcing necessarily folks to necessarily go to the street corner and then come back. So this again is just some small detail to look at in terms of how it all comes together and how it continues to facilitate access to destination or to places for people they want to go to. A small details on page 59, there was just an illustration of how the pickup drop off and the lay-by can occur. You're illustrating the idea potentially of some bollard in this area, so that's a bit of a details, but that's something that I think that should be avoided at all costs. I think it's just like, the more porosity, the more normalization of the pedestrian environment is something that is more sensitive. And again, the green track, love the idea. It continued to merit that exploration. I think what you are learning from the crosstown is absolutely crucial. I think that it has, it continues. I think it's something that as we continue to build these type of infrastructure, not just in the waterfront, but across the city, it needs to continue to be considered. And obviously, I love the idea of CDM. So again, that's a question of resiliency, maintenance, and how we continue to advance that to make sure that they get implemented properly. Again, thank you for a great presentation.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Jenna?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I want to say I agree totally with Nina Marie's comments, and particularly I thought it was really interesting her insight about the presentation manner and the cadence and what you chose to show and didn't show, and I think that is really a kind of instructive for other candidates coming before the board. I in the interest of time, I just want to say I think Nina Marie's students are very lucky to see the presentation today. Personally, I find your proposal for the redesign of sidewalks in a really fundamental way as not only landscape led, but ecology and performative landscape informed, really, really exciting. And we see many presentations about the 21st century transportation systems and ideas. And I actually think this is one of the few that takes the relevant ideas about the 21st century and recast the idea of a sidewalk truly as a place to meander and to linger, as opposed to a flow through. I feel like you've made it into a kind of trail that's bookended by a landscape and an ecology that's really satisfying. And my only suggestion is that you're a little bit bolder. I think it's a great idea, and I would encourage you to push out with the contouring and the carving so that you might actually have to go around a bit of a cleft piece of granite. I think that's okay, and I think it's in the spirit of what you're doing. So be bolder. And then finally, I feel like we should push for as much green track as possible, Adam, and whatever the panel can do to support that. If we can get it another, 1,000 meters, we should do it. It's absolutely the way forward. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Janet. Pat?
Yeah, I really enjoyed your presentation. It was just a pleasure listening to what you had to say. So I guess I'm in agreement with everyone else. Yeah, I won't reiterate what everybody else has said, but I do think just at the level of a kind of a revisioning or a kind of a continuation of the idea of what's been built on Queens Quay, this is an interesting transformation from something that was kind of quite formal to something that becomes less formal. Apart from the performative qualities of it, we go from specimen tree to sort of grove trees. So I think I think it makes the experience of being on Queens Quay from the west to the east actually even that much more interesting and richer of an experience because of the sort of shift as we go east. So I appreciate that. I really appreciate the carving or the shaping of space, how you've shaped. I mean, these are just a deeply talented design team that you're working with, how you shape the edge of the sidewalk. In many cases, it's inflected by the shape of the maple leaf as a way of kind of giving a kind of rationale to the shape of the planting bed. So I think that's all really, really lovely. And then lastly, yes, of course, support for the green track, absolutely. It actually alleviates some of my previous concerns about the sort of width of the right-of-way that we were kind of being challenged with as we were looking at the Portland. So this really helps to ameliorate that kind of sense of like, this huge width of unpermeable surface that we were looking at in some of the earlier design review panels. So anyway, thanks very much.
Okay, thanks, Pat. Jeff?
Paul, would you mind if I commented next?
Oh, no.
I just thank you so much.
That works. Go right
thanks,
ahead.
Jeff. Mine's very quick. As a panel and to the city, if this separation of the two TTC lines does happen this way, which is not for us to comment on right now, I'd just like to keep our eye on the pedestrian crossing under the railway bridge. That would definitely have to be part of whatever package gets implemented to improve that, because that should be a piece that doesn't get lost if we're focusing on these two LRT lines. Adam, thank you so much. I agree with everybody. It was fabulous. Can't wait to see it go in. And one of my secret ambitions is to make everyone in Toronto jealous of the East End. So thank you for participating and helping out with that. Thanks so much.
Okay, thanks, Betsy. Got an East End bias there. Okay, let's go back just a few more speakers. Jeff, are you there?
Yeah, Paul. So thanks very much for the presentation. 10 years ago or so, I was really heavily involved in trying to get developers to wrap their head around low impact development and green infrastructure, and really using public space and right of ways as critical elements. It was totally new, so I feel like I just got a bit of a masterclass refresher on some of this stuff. The main point that I want to emphasize, which is part of comment for you and part for Waterfront in the city, and reflecting some of what Fadi said, is that we're so focused on the right of ways that we're kind of missing the building component, the fabric of what's going to get built on either side of the road and what that looks like. And what I think we've done here is build a really good right of way mobility corridor through the city, and it has a certain characteristic, particularly thinking about the walkability and the people who are actually in this neighborhood, not necessarily those moving through it. The piece that I feel is missing, and this is my opinion to this community, is I still feel like we don't have these tight, intimate urban spaces that are different, that give a different feeling and a different sort of emotional impact than these bigger open spaces. Which is not meant to say that they just need to go along this corridor, but I still don't have a clear vision of where that is. Even in the precinct plan, we sort of demarcate the retail frontage, but not the characteristics of those spaces, the retail. So, I see larger format retail working really well here, lots of transparency, but I still feel like what Villiers Island and the Waterfront needs is a really tight urban corridor. I'd love to see it maybe on Center Street or Old Cherry on Villiers Island. But that's just my comment. Until we see the building intersection or the interface of the buildings and the retail, not just frontage, but the actual footprint, the width, the depth, the characteristics of that retail space with the street, I still find it's hard to really get a sense of what it's like, to live there, what it's going to be as a complete community. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Kevin?
Thanks very much. Very, very much enjoying the presentation and the commentary. I just want to reinforce, as I was asking earlier, we all know that concrete has a huge impact on atmospheric carbon. I think it's a simple thing to say, but it's actually a difficult thing to implement. If we can really drill down, it might be a simple change in the specifications that we really encourage high percentage, supplementary cementing materials in the concrete mix. We're not building high-rise here, so we don't have to, I think, worry so much about the length of curing and so forth. A lot of these concretes are much higher quality, so we need less concrete. So there could be a compound effect if they're designed properly, and we can really mandate in some of these contracts where we use lots of concrete, a very low carbon concrete mix, and we start to change the industry. So I really want to encourage that if there's any opportunity, you can drill down into those specs and make some simple changes that hopefully have big carbon impacts. So thank you.
Okay, thanks. Matthew?
Thank you so much. I completely agree with Jana that you can be bolder on this design. There can be much more of a balance between landscape and infrastructure. So pushing that even further, what's the next step for that is really, really exciting for me. I completely agree with Nina. Marie, leading with landscape, I think, is key to the health of our city, the health of the people that inhabit it, and then also all of our relations. I agree with Fadi in the sense that this is a beautiful case study in placekeeping. Thinking about how we give back to all the things that we've taken from this land is really important, and this is really pushing that idea in a positive direction. So giving back to our relations, whether they be trees, animals, the rain, and how we treat that when it hits the ground is really beautiful to see. So thank you so much for the presentation.
Great, thanks. Bridget?
Yes, just thank you for the presentation. What I appreciate is that you're building on your own firm's local knowledge base. So it's not trying to import something from somewhere else, but I feel like there's so many lessons that have been learned by Queens Quay, the Bentway, this kind of cumulative knowledge. What I feel you talked about at the very beginning of your presentation was being a hinge between the city and the Portlands. And I feel that if we can actually integrate transit as part of our daily life, this will be such a huge leap forward for this whole precinct of the city. I think there's some really great North American examples like Portland, Oregon, where transit is just kind of fully integrated into all kinds of new development. So the idea that you could take the TTC to arrive at Cherry Beach, you could take the TTC to arrive at the Leslie Street Spit for me, and actually just touch the water by actually taking transit, I just think is such a powerful and strong idea. And I feel like all of the work you're doing is like the foundation for this kind of integrated vision of transit, daily life, and the waterfront being tied together. And even though we've spent so much time on this committee over so many years discussing aspects of it, I feel like it's kind of time to have this big, bold vision. And for me, commissioners is part of that. So the issue of how north-south streets and east-west streets in transit actually allow access directly to Lake Ontario and different versions of water along the way is sort of really, really important. So I feel like for me, your presentation lays a foundation for what I think is a bigger vision. I understand the issues of your scope and the scope of each specific project, but I feel like I guess I would like to see it being tied to a kind of a bigger idea about how transit and all of these open public spaces provide this hinge between both the central waterfront and the Don River, the hinge between the city and the Portlands. And then just one last comment. For me, I think for the public, the greenness of buildings is kind of hard to figure out. Concrete is a bit invisible, green roofs are there, but not always accessible. So I feel that this greening of this public infrastructure, the sedums and the grasses, a TTC track that's normally concrete, actually becoming green is not just a kind of nice feature, but it's actually a really important dimension of making visible the values of Waterfront Toronto and being demonstrative in a very public realm. And I just feel like it's such a, so I know it's been presented before, there were discussions about why it doesn't work. What I really appreciate is why it could work. And I mean, I would love to see, Cherry Street from King Street all the way to Cherry Beach being this kind of green TTC infrastructure, this arm that allows you to get right to the water. So I feel like you're such a key part of what I think is a much bigger vision. And I feel that we need to, again, work in these segments, but really achieve this bigger, bolder idea as how transit fully integrates into this whole amazing new precinct of the city. So all my colleagues' comments are appreciated, and I think the presentation is also really appreciated. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Bridget. Peter?
I have very little to add. My colleagues have been very complete in their comments, in particular Nina Marie. I just only want to pry open one thing that Kevin brought up. That's the low carbon concrete. I think generally speaking, we should try to develop a specification on Toronto waterfront where the carbon content of concrete mix, whether it's buildings or infrastructure or roadways or transit, is a publicly measured amount. We're trying to do this in our buildings and our projects, and maybe Toronto Waterfront should take this subject in hand and develop what they can. Otherwise, Adam, just a phenomenal presentation as usual, and just a great piece of work. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Peter. And I guess George, final comments?
Okay, there I am. Sorry, I muted myself because the phone was ringing.
Yeah.
Well, I agree with almost everything my colleagues have said, and I'm certainly as impressed as they are by the kind of scope and comprehensiveness of this presentation. Last time I expressed some concern about the degree of undulation of the side of the planting beds, opposite the street curb in relation to the width of the clear path of pedestrian movement. Adam, in your presentation this morning, you satisfied me that with your diagrams that showed both meandering pedestrian movements and through paths of pedestrian movements, that I think you've got, in my opinion, you've got the balance right. And so in that regard, I want to kind of partially demur from the recommendations of Matthew and Jana that you be bolder, especially if being bolder means reducing the through path in favor of more meandering. I'm the oldest person on the panel, and they're both a lot younger than I am. And I'm walking around in the city is a physical challenge at the best of times. And so you want to make sure I'm not against the little alcoves and eddies. I mean, in principle, I think they're a good idea, but they should not be developed to the extent that the clear free path of movement is impeded. It just presents obstacles to pedestrians such as myself. As Claude pointed out the last time he looked at your scheme and you responded to it, these kind of the narrow edges or very small pointed planting zones are hard to maintain anyway. And if you have where your planting beds do project most deeply into the pedestrian zone, I would urge you not to have simple planting in those locations, but something more robust, or else not only will you have the problem of not enough clear path for old pedestrians like me, but you'll also have trampled planting in those points because people will not respect the edge of the planting bed if it's in the way of their straight path of movement. So it's a bit of a nitpicky point, I admit, but I think you were seeking a balance, and I would encourage you to continue to seek that balance. Otherwise, I think all the innovations you're proposing, as my colleagues have already indicated, are impressive indeed. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. I think that covers all members of the panel, so I'm going to do my best to summarize all these excellent comments, and then we'll give a chance to the proponent for a response, and then we'll take a vote. I think I'm going to start off by obviously saying that all panel members really appreciated the details and the comprehensiveness of the presentation. Leading with landscape is one of the primary goals, of course, of Waterfront Toronto, and I think this is an excellent example of that throughout this territory. This is also an opportunity, as many people have said, to connect the city, the Greenbelt, to the waterfront, and the role of the hinge. That when people start going down Cherry Street towards the water into the Portlands, I think it'll send a powerful, different signal that you're entering a different kind of place, and a special place, given all of the strategies that have been proposed here. I think one of the key themes overall, and it not only just covers Cherry Street, but as I believe Bridget said, it should continue to the rest of the corridors in the Portland, is the whole mindset of integrating transit with green infrastructure. And this becomes a place, an experience, not just a corridor that happens to have a bit of green on either side of it. I think one of the key breakthroughs for me in looking at all this was frankly the change in attitude from the TTC and the crosstown in Scarborough. I must admit, I now have to go out to Warden and take a look at this because I haven't seen this. To me, that's something must have happened. I don't know what, Adam, but I'm very encouraged by that. And not only encouraged by that for the implications for Cherry Street and Queens Quay, but frankly, for other streetcar corridors in the city. It shouldn't be just limited to this corridor. I think the concept, and these are no particular order, the concept of flowering diversity of fruit trees for the Cherry Plaza, I think there's support for that as opposed to a monoculture approach. the commentary about the stormwater capture, the opportunity to build in water monitoring systems in the scope, I think is much appreciated and is very important for this. The coordination of the landscape and the seating and gathering areas with the integration of the building footprints, the entrances, destinations. Many comments were made about some fine tuning or details of that area regarding such things as length of benches, creation of not only small gathering places, but unimpeded pedestrian flow for people of all ages, and placement of another commentary about the placement of the bollards on the laybys. I think there was a question of whether you even need them or not, but I think it was put forward at a commentary about impeding pedestrian flow. So I think that needs to be, some of those things need to be looked at in greater detail. A very important point, given the sort of change in scope right now anyway of not going north with the LRT, is to not forget about the pedestrian crossing under the railway bridge to the Cherry Street Loop. That cannot be forgotten. That is a major opportunity for improvement, and that I think would be, everybody be well advised to include a strategy to address that now rather than later. And commentary about the concrete mix and the low carbon content suggestion, perhaps that maybe this is an area for Waterfront Toronto to take a closer look at and develop a standard for this as a material that is used on the waterfront. In terms of the strategy for Commissioner Street, it was mentioned, and we all realize it's not part of this scope, and it'll be a future connection up to Broadview over time. But I think it's a really important comment that was made, that people should have the mindset that you can take transit everywhere to get to the water, to the beach, east, west, north, south, throughout the Portlands. And it should be a unique experience through these fabulous green corridors to the waterfront. This is a huge opportunity, and the signals that have been sent by this presentation are clearly there. So I think there are many other specific comments that have been made, but I hope I've captured the general consensus of what people have been in support of, and we would give you an opportunity as a proponent to respond to what you've heard from the panel. So I guess back over to you, Adam.
Yeah, wow. We really appreciate the feedback, and we really appreciate the support, because we recognize this is not a traditional streetscape design. So a chance to push it within this forum and have these kind of discussions is really meaningful. So thank you. And I should also say that, you know, on behalf of all the team, this is really fun. And so if we seem a little uptight or nervous, it's just because we know how important it is to get right. But everyone from an engineering side, a client side, the design team, we're all really relishing the opportunity and looking forward to moving ahead. So thank you.
Good, thank you very much. So the only thing left to do is to take a vote from the panel, and I think given the nature of the comments, I would propose a vote of full support. I assume there is agreement on that. Anyone disagree? No? Okay, thank you very much. That's unanimous vote of full support, Adam. So thank you very much, and we look forward to it coming back in the future.
Great, thank you so much.
Okay.
You too.
So we're a little bit over time, 10 after 11. We were supposed to take a very short break. I propose perhaps a 5-minute break, if that works. See you back at 11:15.
Okay, hello everybody. My name is Leon Lai. I am the Design Review Panel Manager with Waterfront Toronto, and I will be introducing West Don Lands Block 20 here today for detailed design review. The proponent is Dream Kilmer Tricon. The design team includes Henning Larson Architects, Claude Cormier and Associates, and also RWDI. So just to recap, in September 2017, Dream, Kilmer, Tricon were the successful proponents for the Infrastructure Ontario RFP for blocks 20, 8, and 347 in the West Don Lands. Block 20 was originally envisioned as a district energy building, described in the 2006 block plan and in the zoning bylaw in 2011. That use is no longer contemplated for the site. The rail protection is required along the southern boundary of the site. It is part of the provincial lands affordable housing program, and it will meet minimum 30% affordable rental. The project has a sustainability requirement of LEED Gold certification, and as directed by City Council following the issuance of the MZOs in the West Don Lands, community benefits are to be secured by the city for the site. Proponent will provide funding or an on-site contribution as part of the community benefits agreement. Programmatically, the ground floor has retail, residential lobby, office lobbies, and also loading and surfaces. The podium also has office areas with a rooftop as amenities. There are 2 residential towers, with the west being the taller one at 162 meters tall. There's 1 level of underground parking. So the project was last reviewed by the panel in April for schematic design. They have since engaged the community as part of site plan working group in August. They're here today for detailed design, and the team anticipates receiving the notice of approval conditions for the site plan application in August next year. The site is located east of the existing streetcar loop on Cherry Street. The rail tracks are directly south of the site. The Cherry Street switching station is located just south of the existing streetcar loop. Oops, sorry. The site is south of the future Block 8, which is under construction right now, and west of the future Block 9. And in the precinct plan, Block 9 was envisioned as a school and community center. North of the project are the future sites for blocks 347 and 10, both of which have already completed their DRP reviews. So following the public land DRP stream, today will be this project's last review unless the panel does not give full support. And to recap the comments from April, the team was commended for developing a well-considered design on a challenging site. The overall massing and landscape approaches are positive, and the city will continue to provide feedback on the pedestrian crossing at Cherry Street to the site. In terms of the building, consider bringing more distillery district red to the base of the building. Consider finer grain facade alternatives to provide transparency and openness that are in keeping with the characteristic of the neighborhood. Consider further enhancement by rethinking the location of the parking entrance to provide a complete pedestrian clearway across the site. Provide design opportunities for the crash wall, and also consider working with TTC and the city to enhance the TTC loop and extension of the public realm. Some concerns on wind impact for the site, so provide some further mitigation strategies. In terms of sustainability, consider targeting and integrating higher energy performance targets, and also provide the energy modeling and outputs from savings by design at this review. And in terms of the areas we would like the panel to consider today, does the revised exterior design successfully extend the palette from the towers to the podium to better respond to the context? Do the revised window configurations and atrium facades successfully create a finer grain characteristic that feels appropriate for the distillery district and the West Don Lands? Are the different types of facades well integrated? Has the ground floor been sufficiently animated along its entire length? how does the new tank house lane interact with the various servicing areas in the podium? At the public realm, does the revised landscape design support the public realm vision and pedestrian connection, circulation at the site? Does the proposal sufficiently protect pedestrians from potential vehicular conflicts? And has the new tank house lane been properly designed for shady conditions? Will this outdoor space be comfortable and functional throughout the seasons? Including things such as the plant species. Are they shade tolerant? Is the lighting strategy appropriate? Wind protection, and also seating. For sustainability, given the sustainable ambition for the site previously and Waterfront Toronto's objectives on sustainability, does the panel support the current targets? And how can the design be more adequately prepared to achieve the future objective of net zero carbon? So with that, I would like to introduce the team. Started with city staff. We have Megan Ralph and Catherine Bailey from the city, community planning. We have Deanne Mighton from urban design. And from the proponent, we have Jordan Kemp, the director of development from Dream for this project. And presenting, we have Christopher Dial, the lead designer with Henning Larsen Architects. We have Mark Halley, senior associate with Claude Cormier and Associates, and also Brandon Law, principal with RWDI. So thank you, and I'll hand this over to you, and I will make you the presenter, Christopher, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that'd be great, Leon.
Yep. Okay, I think that should be working now.
Okay. Can you guys see my screen okay?
Yep.
Yes.
All right.
Go.
All right.
Yes.
Great.
See my screen? Hear me okay? All right.
Yes, we're good.
All right. Thank you. All right. Try and get through this efficiently as I can here. But I think since the last time we've shared this design with you, I think it's come a long way, and we're excited to kind of show you these most recent developments. And I think they do a lot to pick up on the comments that we received from the last DRP. And I think Leon covered all these key takeaways, so we'll kind of move through this quickly. Before we kind of dig into the refinements, just wanted to recap on our objectives for the design. One was bridging the natural and urban contexts between Corktown Commons and Distillery District, creating a people-first streetscape, marking the Distillery District in the skyline, and also creating an eastern gateway into the city of Toronto. I think we're all aware of where this project sits and its relationship to the Distillery District and Corktown Commons, and that's been an important factor for us throughout our design process. Creating this people-first streetscape where we have been really focusing, and you'll see a lot of this development this time on really trying to break down the podium facade and make it much more sensitive to the neighborhood scale, while at the same time making sure there's enough integrity in the tower to really create an iconic presence at the scale of the city. And then also, really thinking about the building's relationship to the Distillery District and the desire to really create a beacon that marks the Distillery District in the skyline, similar to the windmill from the past. And then lastly, the gateway to Toronto. The positioning of this site is a fantastic opportunity where it really, as you're arriving through car or train, you're really greeted as you're coming into the city by this building. And then here you get a view looking to the west. Oh, Boris telling me to full screen. All right. And then this is just a overall view where you see our two towers here, and it allows you to get a sense of the significance of these buildings in the skyline to Toronto. The site plan, this remains pretty much the same since we presented this to you in the past. So I'll move quickly through that, and the massing overall has remained consistent with what we've been sharing, and I want to go into like the key elements of this massing that we've been adjusting since the last time we shared information with you. And that's three major things. One is how we've been terracing the podium and really trying to work towards creating a more sensitive facade that is more in line with the surrounding fabric. The other one being materiality and really looking at pulling the red tower material closer to the ground. I think that helps to, connect with the area, but also I think work goes a long way in terms of breaking down the scale of this pavement. And the last one is the window orientation, where we've gone from a horizontal window where you see where we felt that it was emphasizing the length of this long facade, and I think orienting it vertically has really helped to try and mitigate that. So here you see a view of our latest design, and starts to give you a sense of how the red copper fabric is pulling down towards the ground, and basically comes down to the datum of the crash wall that is established on the southern side. And this crash wall datum pulls across and ties into this gray brick facade material that picks up on that datum, but then shifts up and down to create variety and interest as you move along Tank House. So you just see where we were before in terms of the podium window orientation, and kind of where we are now in terms of proportion. And then also in terms of terracing, this is what we showed in the last presentation, where we'd started to do some terracing, but I think we've continued to improve that and step these edges down and just have made it much more sensitive. And then lastly, materiality, where previously we were showing the podium as fully envisioned as gray brick, and now we've pulled that copper material down, and it now comes down to that crash wall datum, and I think is going a long way in connecting with the rest of the neighborhood. Here you get kind of an overall sense of how the project is working within the site, and the way that these three main blocks of our podium are broken down by these more kind of glassy portals, as we call them, that will show you how we've tried to kind of make them more sensitive to the surroundings as well. But they really begin to define the grid of the site and tie it into the fabric of the city. Programmatically, office podium, residential on top. Here you see, I think this diagram really illustrates how we've been working to activate Tank House Lane along the entire stretch of it, and placing the pickup drop-off porte cochere in the middle of it to really maintain activity around the site through all hours of the day. And again, on the ground floor here, you can see like how all these different program types are really maintaining an active public realm along Tank House Lane. And then in the mezzanine, we've also worked hard to try and maintain a double height presence along the perimeter of Tank House Lane, where I think it'll really allow for a much more of a stronger connection between indoors and outdoors, and really help to activate Tank House. As you move up the building, here you see our typical floor plate, and where we've introduced these terraces both on the east and west edges. And then you also notice how we've been doing some pushing and pulling along the northern facade that I think will show you how it's been going a long way in terms of breaking down the facade, but also it's helped us a lot in terms of wind mitigation. And then on our 7th level amenity terrace, here, Mark from CCA will go into this a bit more in depth, but just to give you a sense of how the planning is working there. And then going up into the low-rise floor plate here are the towers, and then the subtle shift that as you move up into the high-rise floor plates. And finishing off with at the 46th floor, the amenity floor here that looks out across the city and the water, and then green roofs on the top of our towers here. Now I want to talk in more depth about the facade and materiality of our building. And really, it's essentially four material components: the concrete of the crash wall, the gray brick that is meant to connect with that gray kind of concrete crash wall materiality, the copper that is the dominant material of the facade, and then you see as you ascend the building, this brass sort of champagne-y color material begins to be revealed and becomes more present as it rises across the tower. And at the top, it's become the dominant material and allows the kind of copper elements to express the grid of the two towers, and also creates this sort of lantern elements at the top of the towers that I think really add a sense of signature and beacon-esque quality to these two towers. So here, give you a sense of the kind of primary material palettes: the gray brick, the copper, which is actually an anodized aluminum that we're looking at, and then this brassy champagne color metal at the top. And you can see how in this diagram how that creates a sort of gradient going from the lower floors, and as you ascend, it becomes more and more presence until you get to those lantern elements at the top. And the material palette, you know, it's connecting to the distillery district in terms of the character of the brick that we're suggesting. The red coppery material really connects with that red brick of the distillery district as well. And then using this brassy shimmery material to really celebrate the tower as a beacon in the sky. The brick that we're suggesting is we're very interested in finding a brick that has a blend of subtle different gray variations, and allows you to get this sort of wide sort of range of texture and tones that I think will bring the sort of tactile quality to the brick that will just be, I think, a fantastic material to interact with on the ground level of the project. And then starting at the upper podium and going up through the tower, we're imagining copper anodized aluminum, and the way in which the anodizing process happens, you know, you inherently get variation in the color of this copper, which I think just even adds to the effect that we're looking for, where we kind of break down the scale and get this sort of variation across the facade, which we think will be pretty interesting. And then just a reference of the brass anodized aluminum that we're looking at as that feature material at the top. And then just so to give you a sense of kind of where we were, the previous materiality, where there was a strong break between tower and podium and red and gray, and not really much of a sort of beacon or kind of feature element at the top of the tower either. And then now switching here, we see the red pulling much closer to the ground, and then also sort of more of that expression of top of tower. And I want to dig into the podium a little bit more, and I think this image starts to really get at the work we've been doing in terms of pushing and pulling of this facade, as well as material shifts. And I've touched on this earlier in the presentation, but you know, the idea of really working with this long facade, and how do we really break that down into a scale that is appropriate for the public realm and for human engagement. And here, this is just a snippet from our SPA submittal, but where you really see we've started to dig into exactly what this lower facade is, and this gray brick. And then within each of these window panels, we have these precast fins that are inserted within the window openings, and they randomly sort of bounce around the facade. And that's in an effort to sort of create this connection to the concrete crash wall that's on either end of the building. And so here you see that fabric in a little bit more detail. And from that sort of base fabric, we've put a lot of effort into, you know, studying each of these different entry conditions and portal conditions throughout the length of tank house, and have been studying them each very closely and looking at how they can kind of push in moments or open up in moments, and really create variety as you look down this tank house lane, and hopefully it helps to really mitigate the length of this facade. And then here you see kind of a more rendered version of this with landscaping included, and you know, with the awnings and these subtle shifts, I think it goes a long way to create a very inviting public realm. And then looking the opposite direction here, looking west. And this view I wanted to touch on, you know, previously we'd shown a super basically butt jointed glass system on these portal moments that separate the three primary volumes of the podium. And we've now created more of a fin system that sits in front of that, and it's a little bit hard to read here, but we've also been pushing and pulling the line of this glass to create more variation and try and break up that that reading of a strong solid glass wall that I think was the concern last time. And I also just wanted to touch on the crash wall and sort of walk through. I think there's obviously a lot of constraints on what we can do on this crash wall. The fact that it's sitting on our property line, it becomes hard to sort of plant in front of it. And it's also the limitations of, you know, like we're not able to clad anything on it or do much sort of variation or relief in that surface. So we're basically looking at a couple of different tracks. One being looking at a sealant that would basically preserve it and, you know, keep it safe from graffiti and damage in that way. Or we're also, you know, considering and looking at the idea of it being something for public art or something to be displayed along this wall, but that's still very much an ongoing effort. And then moving up the building, this is the lower podium facade where you see the copper first revealed, and you get these inset brass elements starting to pop up sort of subtly. You see how that copper kind of wraps around the southern edge and sits on top of this crash wall. I think this is a good view that also gives you a sense of how that crash wall relates to the datum of the brick facade wrapping around the building. And then this image and the following one will also give you I think a great sense of how we've really pulled the red down a lot more into the public space. And I think as you move around this building, the connection and experience of associating this red copper material with the rest of the distillery district material palette, I think has improved a lot. And then before we shift to the tower, just one note in terms of all the terracing that we've been doing and the sort of pushing and pulling and creating these entry portals has also gone a long way in improving the wind concerns and mitigating that issue a lot. So you can see where we were originally to kind of where we are now. And I think we've also, I think Mark will touch on also landscaping methods that we've been deploying also to help with that effort. And then just quickly to touch on the tower facade. You know, the tower facade is essentially based on a grid, and we have two window types, an awning and a Juliet, and they're basically the same size, and they bounce around this grid to create sort of variation within that grid. We then insert these kind of copper insert panels that also create this variation across the facade, and as you ascend the tower, those insert pieces begin to flip out from this copper to the brassy material, creating that signature at the top. And so you see here this essentially based on a 3-meter grid, and then how you get these sort of brassy elements that are introduced, and they have a sort of faceted fold associated with them. So as you climb the building, you get more of them. They're really going to work to capturing light and reflecting light in different ways, and really creating this shimmering presence in the skyline. And then at the top of the building, where essentially all the copper is dropped away except for the grid itself, you get. And then in this mechanical zone where we're able to get more depth, and we begin to facet these panels even more dramatically, and allows it to really capture light and shimmer in the sort of lantern-esque quality that I mentioned. And then just one last shot of sort of looking out towards the water and these two towers here, and just the way that they're sort of, I think, doing a lot in terms of the red pulling all the way down to the ground, and then also this, you really get a sense of how these crowns begin to work in the skyline. Thank you, and with that, I will hand it over to Mark.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I guess you'll continue to change the slides on your side, and
sure, yeah.
I'll do the talking. Yeah. Okay, just as Chris was saying earlier, for the next slide, Chris, building on the base objectives, this site is kind of like a crossroads between the materiality of the distillery and kind of the vegetal sustainability ambitions of the Canary District. So we're trying to merge those two together, so there's some continuity between the transition between these two signature districts in the city. Next slide. So just overall, this is a plan of Block 20 and Block 8, and we're trying to create a public realm through the catenary lighting, through the use of materials that is cohesive across the entire block. And then also trying to work with scale, because as you can see with the extension of the tank house lane, there's going to be mostly laminar flow going east-west and then circulating through to the courtyards and beyond, and trying to somehow optimize the private, which is, for example, the townhouses on Block 8, and the very public facade on the south side on block 20, and trying to navigate the nuance between private, semi-private, semi-public, and public to create in a very subtle way that we think is going to work. So if we look at the next slide. And just one thing I want to point out, last time we presented this, we were working around a fire route that was planned for block 8. And so the consequence was we had this, tank house lane is maybe between 14 to 17 meters, and we had most of that space on the north side next to the townhouses, and only about 2 to 3, especially in the middle where those planters are close to the south facade. And we thought, that's where we want to concentrate most of the people coming through, on that very public edge along the south side and less so on the north side. And so we've positioned the planters further towards the center of Tank House Lane to accommodate the fire route on the block 20 side. And then it allows kind of this to be a very public 7-meter wide passageway for most of the people on the south side. And then in front of the townhouses, it's a narrower, between maybe 4 to 6 meters, and allows for more of a semi-private, semi-public use with planting and furniture positioned to create a buffer. So there is still some privacy maintained for the townhouses, but at the same time, you'll be able to see clearly the sight lines across the entire space. Now, one thing I just want to point out on the south or the bottom image, the proposed fire route 1, you can see there's some vehicle turning movements, and most of the vehicle movements I think are the ones going to be going to the pickup drop-off. But we also are showing the ones that are working with the block 8 loading areas and the block 20 loading areas, just to show how the limitations were working around the limitations on the far east side. And there's also then that Metrolinx property. So next to that Metrolinx property, we've incorporated a 3-meter wide linear dog relief area that'll be fenced in, which will be able to service the whole block, not just block 20, but block 8 and block 20. And also to address some of the concerns, because I know we've created kind of an open-ended public realm where people can go through courtyard AB or courtyard BC to the north. But for those who may want to go further towards the east, to help sort of balance the traffic routes and the pedestrian routes, we've installed kind of you can see, you can't really see too clearly, but a crosswalk patterning across those drive aisles. And like I say, the loading areas will be much less frequently used, but I think more importantly is the one where on the route to the pickup drop-off. And with the transportation consultant, we will have some ways of calming traffic, a stop sign before vehicles can leave into the driveway, so that there is consideration for those two kind of modes to intersect in a safe way. Next slide. Now, for furniture materiality, as we had discussed last time, the material on the ground floor is meant to continue the expression of the distillery. We're proposing a Whitaker Greer red clay brick with proportions about 2 inch to 9 inch, about 1 to 4.5, kind of a classic slender brick paving. And then for the areas where there'll be kind of where the vehicles are consolidated, where there might be some heavier vehicles, we're using the same kind of paving material that's used throughout some of the streets in the Canary District in the West Don Lands, and that's the Paleotech paver. Now for furniture, we're intending to integrate this linear bench into the precast planter walls of those sort of islands in the center of Tank House Lane. And you can see there's an example there where we want to make this kind of transition between concrete to wood flush, so they're discrete and seamless, and positioning the backrests and armrests in a way that can help to control privacy, especially for the north side, and positioning these where we think they're mostly needed, in front of the main entrances to the commercial lobbies, in front of the pickup drop-off, and elsewhere throughout the space. Mostly on the south side, where the majority of the heavily public use is going to be circulating, but also on the north side, so some of the residents can also take advantage of lingering in the space. And then the second kind of furniture unit we're proposing is this semicircular bench, floating platform bench that will be, it mimics the language of the planters, but it also provides additional opportunities for seating. Next slide. Now for planting, as was raised in the comments before, there's this is kind of the shadier part of the block, and so the planting is deployed and selected based on that condition. And so on the ends, where we have more sun and we have some issues to address, such as wind, we're proposing to plant the pine, especially for the wind conditions, the red pine, and the Kentucky coffee trees, as well as shagbark hickories. So those are kind of 3 species that will work where there is a bit more sun, but in the center where there's the kind of the least hours of the sunlight compared to the rest of the space, we're proposing to go with hop hornbeam. It's a very shade tolerant tree. And for the ground covers in the planting beds below, also the palette is based on plants that thrive in areas where there's more shade. And we've also, I think the proportions here are about 60% native species, 78% drought tolerant. We want to especially kind of put in a few really tough species so that, you know, this is a heavily publicly used area, to make sure that in any condition there'll be some sort of, it'll remain green. So there's some species that are more delicate. We want to make sure they're combined with others that are more robust to make sure we always have this verdant condition in the center of Tank House Lane. Next slide. Can you switch to the next one?
It didn't shift for you?
No, on my side it didn't. You guys are looking at the slide with the sections?
Yeah, we see the
Yes,
interconnected tree
Yeah, we're seeing
soils.
See that?
And
Okay, I've got my own presentation in parallel, so if mine doesn't switch, I'll count that yours does. So you can see here we have there we go, it just appeared. Thank you. We're proposing to have this interconnected soil trench along the north edge of the slab, so we can have incorporate a drop slab at the edge over the parking units, so we can maintain clear heights over the drive aisles below. But to have this continuous large kind of soil volume interconnected, it provides us with a lot of advantages. And one of them also being that we will be redirecting surface flows, surface runoff, into a perforated pipe system for passive irrigation, so we can intercept those flows and use them for passive irrigation in this linear system. Next slide.
did it change for you?
Not on my side. I think it's taking some
Okay.
time, a bit further away, but I'll continue. One thing that is really interesting in terms of the soil story of this project, in addition to the opportunity to provide this continuous soil trench on the ground floor, is the opportunity provided by this amazing transfer slab situation we have going on level 7. And that's about, in some cases, between 1.2, 1.4 meters of a drop. And it allows us to have deep soils throughout. And we really want to take advantage of this, because with this, we'll be able to plant large trees that meet Toronto Forestry's requirements for canopy trees. And we'll be able to store a lot more storage for runoff, and have kind of this flush planting condition. It's going to feel more like a park than it would kind of your conventional outdoor amenity space. Next slide.
Okay, it's changed.
For green roofs, overall on the towers, we're proposing to go with more of a conventional extensive green roof in the non-accessible areas. But where we do have these kind of deeper soils, we really want to take advantage of them. So in addition to trees, we're going to have shrubs and ground covers that take advantage of the abundant light conditions in this level, the abundant soil and moisture conditions available to the planting, and to really kind of make it a verdant and park-like environment. Next slide. So you can see here just an overview of the layout of the spaces, which are intended to be a continuation or an extension of the program that's happening within the indoor amenities. In the southwest, we have a co-working space. In the middle, on the south side, we have the outdoor dining and the lounge. On the north side, where there's more shade, that's going to be a fire lounge. East of the East Tower, we're proposing the outdoor pool deck, which will be in connection with the indoor fitness areas. So you can come in here to do yoga or stretching or swimming or whatever, or just lying in the sun. And at the far east end, we switch from residential amenity to commercial amenities. So on level 7, we have a large outdoor commercial amenity for the office spaces. And then, as Chris had presented, the tiered balconies or terraces below that are also incorporated into the landscape strategy as well. Next slide. So here for the planting, you can see there's a lot more diversity of planting available, because we do have a lot of kind of a wider range of conditions that can kind of support this. And we're kind of emphasizing an emphasis on native species and drought tolerant species, but also ones that bloom across the seasons. So we've kind of assessed how we can maintain a blooming sequence from springtime through to the end of the fall, where we can always have some kind of this visual interest, but also kind of a source for pollinators. And the trees, we're proposing to go with species that are robust for this higher level, drier condition, using honey locust and Kentucky coffee tree. And in areas where there's more wind, there's one area in particular where we're proposing to go with red pine, just to help break some of those winds, especially in the wintertime. And just one more thing I want to point out is the use of the Rus typhina, the staghorn sumac, which is a really tough species. And I know with the architects, there's this kind of ambition to have these kind of verdant edges, almost like a hanging gardens approach. And we're working towards, I'll show you in a few seconds, a strategy how maybe we can green those parapets. And the species we propose for that mostly would be kind of this staghorn sumac, kind of as you see along the rail corridors. And it would be beautiful in the fall when it can kind of reinforce the redness, the red hues of the architecture. Next slide. Now I'm just quickly going to go through some of these areas and views. So the first one we're looking at is the outdoor amenity for the dining and lounging, just south of that indoor bar amenity between the two towers. On the next slide after that is the co-working space, where we have a lawn where you can lie in and you can work on your computer with some elevated tables. The next slide after that, you can see just a quick glimpse of the fire lounge. And all of these images, these slides, you can see we have a section which kind of reinforces that drop slab condition, which we're really intending to use to full effect. And the next slide is for the outdoor fitness area where we see the pool. We see a lawn that can be used for lounging, sunning, or yoga, or whatever, or different kinds of activities. And you can see the image on the bottom center, just the long actual view that you have towards an oblique sort of east facade of that tower. We think is quite an interesting experience for that outdoor pool deck. And then the next slide is for the level 7 commercial terrace, which is the largest of them for the commercial amenities. And then the last one I'm going to show you today is just some details and views of those parapet planters, which we're still developing. But because these are quite linear, slender spaces, they're kind of from kind of a concept point of view is more of an active area. So we want to have a low guard so you can see out to the horizon, the panorama beyond. But at the same time, it's meant to thus feel like a parapet, but more like almost like on the edge of a cliff, where the vegetation creates these perspective vistas, the picturesque vistas throughout. And we're able to maybe then have at the guardrail elevation a working surface which doubles as a guardrail, and it kind of creates a double of protection, doubling the purpose of protection, and also this linear workspace that you could use for vaping, bringing your computer or whatever, working outside of your office spaces. And just one last thing I want to point out is the buildup under the pavers includes a retention panel, a reservoir panel, which will help to capture rainfall, but also that reservoir panel is connected to all the planting. This is a typical approach for all of the green roof areas we have here. So that water can then move laterally and then be used directly by the soil in the planted areas, and then just evapotranspirated to create kind of a full circle for the rain story on these terraces. And that concludes the landscape portion of the presentation. Thanks, Chris.
Hey, everyone. Yeah, Brandon Lauder, BI, tackling the sustainability portion of this presentation. So to start off, so it was mentioned, the Savings by Design program was mentioned. So we, the team participated in that program early summer, June of this year. And really the primary intent of participating in that program is we wanted to make absolutely certain that we had all of the possible energy conservation measures, all the strategies and latest technologies considered and vetted as part of this design process. And so kind of utilizing the expert knowledge of all those outside subject matter experts that participated in that shred was really helpful. And so several dozen energy conservation measures were run and modeled and quantified during that charrette, and then kind of following that as we delivered the report to Enbridge. The below energy conservation measures that we have listed here currently are where we stand. So I think the main point here, the main thing that we prioritized to the extent that we feel that we can is the passive measures. So we have a building here that has a relatively, due to the nature of the kind of tall, slender towers that we have, has a relatively high envelope to GFA ratio. And so we've really prioritized these passive measures to the wherever we could to kind of limit the skin losses that we're seeing here. And so the big one there is keeping the window wall ratio fairly low. It's currently just below 45%. specking the highest performance opaque walls that we can achieve. And this was really a target that was set through that sustainable design savings by design program charrette, where the subject matter experts in our design team collaborated to try to figure out how far we could push these overall effective values, inclusive of all thermal linear losses as well. So we're currently targeting between R10 and R12, R12 being the more prominent target on the podium, R10 being the more prominent target on the towers. And glazing, so an effective USI between 1.7 and 1.85. So these are still double glazed that we're proposing, but really the highest double glazed product that you can achieve. So it's predominantly achieved from a low E coating on surface 2 and 4 of the glazing units. And then the podium roof, which is really obviously the biggest exposed roof that we have, targeting R40. We're then using what we can do to reduce demands further on the building through demand control ventilation, most applicable to the commercial portion, but also densely occupied spaces in the residential portion of the development. And then airside energy recovery. So going as high as we can there, 65 plus for sensible recovery for the in-suite ERVs and 80% plus sensible airside recovery for the commercial portion. And then on the plant side, condensing boilers, magnetic bearing chillers, so as efficient we can get with that type of, with the 4-pipe fan coil system that we're using, and domestic hot water low flow fixtures, given that that is, of course, a big end use, especially in a residential building like this. We're also planning on having solar wall on at least the tower mechanical penthouses right now on the south and east facades, southeast, west, east and west facades of those mechanical penthouses for the towers. And then I think also crucially, we're planning on having this building be district energy ready, so that when Enwave does and hopefully does expand to this neighborhood, we are ready to connect and enjoy the efficiencies and greenhouse gas savings attributable to that network. We've also kind of undertaken a series of detailed feasibility studies that some of these are still being contemplated. So geothermal, which I know was mentioned on DRP2, so we engaged a geothermal designer and to provide a detailed feasibility study there. That work is still kind of undergoing, still happening, and the investigation and decision making there is still happening. Domestic hot water heat recovery is another thing we were looking at in detail, had costed and had kind of financial analysis conducted for. And we're also collaborating with a building integrated photovoltaics company to figure out if there are is any application that we might be able to look at for BIPV. Next slide, please. And so this is where we currently stand. So you see the tier 1 requirements on the left, and we're comfortably meeting all of those requirements, and really fairly close to the tier 2 thresholds that would be required for this project. So an energy use intensity of 140, a thermal energy demand intensity of 52, and a greenhouse gas intensity of 18. We also have the CMHC rental construction financing program, which is a minimum 15% better than the NECP 2015 in both energy and greenhouse gas intensity, and we are comfortably exceeding those requirements as well. Next slide. And then, as mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, our mandate here is LEED Gold. And so we're still being fairly conservative in the number of energy points that we're carrying here, with the intent of using the LEED program as kind of our guiding template for everything else sustainability for the building. So we currently have 63 points targeted here. It's still early, so we do hope to move at least another 2 or 3 over to the yes column here, but we are kind of comfortably in line with our LEED Gold path. That's it.
Okay. There's no other slides from anyone. We're good. So let's move to questions from the panel. And I think I'll start off with Jeff, if you're there.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Yeah, Brendan, I got a bunch for you. The first question I have, with the double glazed windows with the low E coating on side 4, have you guys talked about durability and maintenance issues around that side 4 coating?
Yeah, we have. That was actually a question we asked the subject matter expert, Dave, who you obviously know. Yeah, and so that was one of the questions that we asked. And apparently that concern has kind of been put to bed over the past couple of years as we've kind of seen these kind of reach their 7-8 year life cycle now, where it's kind of been available and implemented. And so apparently it is not as big of a concern, if any concern, anymore. But that was a really good question and something that we did look into in collaboration with subject matter experts.
Great. So just to confirm, LEED Gold, you guys are on version 4. For the energy pathway, have you looked at version 4.1 as the compliance path?
Yeah, it's very likely that we will end up following it and take credit for some of the greenhouse gas reductions that we're achieving here as well. Yeah, we haven't exactly finalized our path there yet, but we did end up going there, for instance, for Block 8. And I think it's very likely that we will end up following that here as well.
Okay, right. And then I noticed in your feasibility studies, you talked about building BIPV. So you guys are looking at that. I've seen some really interesting BIPV options out there. So I'm sort of curious if is it still on the table? And I will also mention that I've also heard some interesting BIPV financialization models that are being kicked around, which might help address some of the upfront capital costs. So just curious if you're sort of looking at that from the financial picture for BIPV as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the one that is most likely, if we were to move forward, one is the one that has the financial model in place. So they pay the upfront capital costs and then essentially give you a discount on the energy that's generated, the electricity that's generated on that for over a 30-year period. So that's the most likely if we were to move forward with it. So the main hangups that we have currently are around aesthetics and durability of the systems.
Awesome.
And so we just need to address those. Yeah.
Great. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff. Kevin, you want to go next?
Thank you. Brandon, I just wanted to ask you, I think, overall the TEDI values, look pretty good. We can always go lower, obviously, in my opinion, but nonetheless, on the system side, right now, you're primarily gas-fired, 4-pipe fan coil system. Have we looked at a decentralized heat pump system?
Yeah, so water source heat pump. We have kind of contemplated that. That was one of the runs that we did through the Savings by Design process, but it was not chosen, mostly on a economic standpoint right now. So.
And I just want to clarify. I was asking about decentralized.
Air source heat
pump. What's that?
Sorry, I'll let you finish.
Sorry. Okay. No, what I meant was that we have a four-pipe system that we're contemplating right now, so we can run, a chilled loop and a heating loop depending on the loads. That suggests to me that there's some simultaneous heating and cooling going on, and the kind of morphology, the blocking and stacking of the building would suggest that that's absolutely the case. Did we look at perhaps going to a 2-pipe solution, removing a bit of that infrastructure, and then doing decentralized heat pumps in the unit so that we can take advantage of that ambient loop and then run it obviously on electricity, so there's a huge carbon savings there, and B, getting a lot of quote unquote free heat.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. No, the short answer is no, we have not. Hasn't come up. I'd be happy to bring it back to the mechanical design team and see if it's something that could be contemplated. But yeah, it's really interesting. I actually, Kevin, have not seen that, but it's certainly
the reason
thinking it through.
I don't want to bridge into the suggestions yet, but I just want to ask that question because I think that if you truly are considering some connection to a future, say, low carbon network, that central conditioning of that loop is something that we want to consider as a expedient crossover and expedient renovation. If the TEDI values are good and we're trying to control our skin losses, which I really appreciate you talking about, then the last thing we have to do is look at that greenhouse gas intensity, which could be a lot lower, right? Which ultimately is the main metric. So, yeah, that's my question. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Matthew, are you there?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to ask a question about the crash wall. You said that it couldn't be textured. Is this a requirement of the CNR, or is it another requirement? Where's that coming from?
Sorry. Yes. So we understand from Metrolinx that there's a real limit to how much we could texture it. I think it was like 40 millimeter maximum amount that we could add, you know, any kind of groove or relief or striation into it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, Peter.
Just two questions. The first one is around the copper, and I assume that the actual finish is not copper, that it's copper anodized aluminum. Can you confirm that there's no copper exposed to the outside air?
Yes, that's correct. It's a copper color anodized aluminum product. Okay,
well, that's good to hear. And the second question is, last time you presented, we as a panel, we were quite interested in the issues around graffiti on the crash wall. And you kind of glossed over it in your presentation. I'm wondering, what measures are you taking to make sure that doesn't become the longest, highest graffiti in Toronto?
Yeah. So we have actively been looking into a few different products that are basically anti-graffiti coatings that you would put on the concrete, and there's a wide range of, like, you could have something that's totally clear and you don't even know it's there. There's other products where you could coat it and it has a certain color or sheen to it. So there's a lot of options there, but that would prevent graffiti in terms of just making it easy to clean.
What about an active kind of visible video recording presence, so that anybody who knows that they're applying graffiti to that wall will be recorded for posterity?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good thing we should consider as well.
Okay, anything else, Peter?
No, that's good. It's
okay, great.
It's I think.
Bridget.
I have a couple of questions. What's the percentage of affordable housing within the overall complex?
It's 30%.
30%. And then are there other programs like a daycare and library that are being contemplated, or are it's just office and residential?
Bori, can you speak to that? Bori.
Sorry, maybe I can address that. It's currently it's just being located as not as a daycare, and if we do have to have a daycare or something like that, it would probably be a tenant installation.
So probably not connected to any of the outdoor terraces or anything.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yep.
Hi.
Sorry
about that. Sorry about that. So we have looked at daycare as a potential option. We've looked at all of the requirements, and it looked like it was not feasible on the site. And I believe other program is being contemplated by DKT on potentially neighboring sites, which I think Barty was alluding to.
Okay. And then I just had a question about the gray brick and what the kind of sort of meaning of it is to you, because I think that, I see definitely a transition and adjustments from our last meeting where it was very much a kind of gray clad podium with a red brick tower emerging out of it. But I guess I just still want to understand a bit more from your perspective, the kind of, maybe the value, you talked about a kind of the materiality of the red brick coming to the ground. But I feel like, I just want to understand more about this gray brick and what its meaning is to you within the overall project.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. And I think it's sort of a twofold answer, I think, to us. One, we have this crash wall that is wrapping around like more than 50% of our project. And I think to us, the use of the gray brick helped us to make that crash wall feel more tied in and considered with the rest of the project. And so I think by sort of establishing that datum that represents that crash wall and then playing with that and allowing us to sort of make that connection between the two, I think helps a lot. And I also think that by, right now, the gray and the red, the copper, the way that it's sort of bifurcating the podium into these kind of two different zones based on the materials, I think it goes a long way in kind of reducing the scale of the podium. So I think it's helping us a lot in that regard. And then I would also say that I think the gray also allows the building to have, a little bit of a kind of signature or presence that I think adds to the variation within the context that I think could help.
So is it more like signaling office versus residential still? Is that?
It doesn't really signal program change anymore. Previously it did when it was all the podium was the brick, and now the podium's still office in there, so it's half of your office is clad in brick and half of it has the aluminum paneling.
And then just one quick question. What have you done in relation to the kind of glazing in your kind of your northern wall of block 20 to create a degree of transparency in those north-south passages? So you end the north-south passages with a kind of a puncture in your longer wall, this curving wall. Is it going to read transparent where I kind of see through it, or is it going to read more like a glass wall?
I believe you're referring to like if you see my screen where I'm pointing, these kind of two zones where we have
the trees on the north-south going from, I guess,
through here,
Mill Street down to your atriums or your kind of office entry conditions.
I mean, our intention is that the glass would be quite transparent. We're not looking to have something that has a high level of reflectivity to it. So the idea is that you would get a lot of depth in that facade and see deep into the building. And I think the western one where the building is wider, you're probably less likely to see all the way through it. And it also sort of depends on how that's fitted out from an office tenant perspective. But I think on the eastern one, depending on the fit out and how it gets built out on the inside, the fact that it is so narrow there could be that potential.
Thank you. Great.
Sure.
Okay, Fadi?
Just a quick question to Mark. You had mentioned there are a couple of pine trees that are being planted. These are just clarification? They're happening in the on the public realm in the ground, right? And
Correct.
can you just let me know where?
Yeah. Chris, could you go to page 69?
Sure. You see it, Mark?
I can't, but you probably can. So I
can see it.
Yeah. So Fadi, you see at the far east end next to that dog strip, there's two there that are in an interconnected plantings strip, and so then there's. Yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry. So they're on. Go ahead.
Well, and then the other ones are actually affiliated more with Block 8 at the other end of Tank House Lane, which were also put there for wind conditions. So there's kind of bookended by the same species.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Nina Marie.
Yes, thank you. While I have Mark there, I have a question for you. Following on Fadi's question about the Pinus resinosa, it is resinosa red pine, not Australian pine that you're speccing?
Yes.
That's great. Nice to see that in an urban condition, and a lovely choice for wind, and a kind of intimate selection for that lane. The Rus typhina, the sumac that you've specified, did I understand that's for the that's for roof garden planting? I don't see it on the street level. It's intended for the roofs, yeah?
Correct. Yeah, it's not on the street level. It's just along the parapets to have something.
Okay, on the yeah. So
yeah.
it gives you that screen, a filigreed screen-like effect.
Correct. Yeah.
And you can't kill them with a shovel. Okay, that's great. I have another question for, I think it might be for Brendan, but I'm not sure. I have a question about the low reflectance glass that's spec'd for bird safe quality. Is it also etched or fritted, or just the Ornolux type of low reflectant glass?
Yeah, so there will be a portion of it that'll have to be fritted as well, just for Toronto Green Standard compliance. So I think it's the first 18 meters or so in height and elevation. So that would be, you know, above any vegetation. So we'd also have to continue that up some of the residential towers as well, above
So
the
is
podium.
that just a question, and maybe to help me understand, is if the glass is reflectant less than 15%, it's generally by the American Bird Standard agreed to be bird safe. But is the low E coating principally for aesthetic, to draw you to reduce reflection for aesthetic purposes as well, but it's not enough alone to meet the TGS standard? Is that why it must also be fritted, or what's the?
That's right. Yeah. The low E is strictly an energy performance in this point, and we're going to try to actually keep the visual transmittance of the and the reflectivity of the glazing quite low.
Yeah, it should be. If it's less than 15%, it should meet bird safe standards. But I guess the issue is it's not currently in the TGS standard. That's what I'm getting at? Is that correct?
There is a reflectivity piece within TGS as well. If anyone on the team knows this better, please feel free to jump in. But yeah, but that's basically the low E coatings that we're proposing or currently planning on should not impact that the bird friendly piece as well. We would still be looking at some type of fritting.
Just seems like a double win. That's all. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks. Jana.
Thanks, Paul. Just one really quick question. It's about the outdoor pool in the amenity area. Is that a seasonal pool, or is that a heated 12-month-a-year pool?
My understanding, it's seasonal. It won't be used. It won't be heated in the wintertime.
Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Pat?
If you just go to slide 54, I guess I just don't understand the space or where the property line is at the crash wall and the relationship of that section to the rail corridor. Whose land is that? I can't quite tell from some of your site plans where the sumacs are growing, where you've got the trees.
This is my understanding. It's Metrolink property. Yeah.
Oh, it's Metrolink. Okay, so you're right on the property line, and that just seems to me to be kind of, apart from any issues related to graffiti, an incredibly unsafe area. Has anybody said anything to you about that? It's recessed. It's a little bit lower than the rail corridor. It is very long and kind of hidden. Is it? Any thoughts about, particularly a blank wall, how it would be safe or could be safe?
I think our intention would be to prevent people from going back there as much as we could.
So I guess it's something that just needs to be coordinated with Metro about how that's going to be managed. Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Okay. George.
Well, I have a question, but I'd actually like to refer it to Pat, who didn't bring this up, and maybe Betsy as well, since I'm used to both of them being good on this kind of issue. I have limited experience with aluminum cladding pretending to be brass or copper, but in past discussions, Pat and Betsy have been very good at cautioning about the extent to which the result will be the one the designers are looking for. And so I would welcome Pat's and Betsy's. I mean, I noted Peter congratulating them for it not being real copper, but that it remains the question as to whether this aluminum substitute is actually going to have the desired results. So, but I know that my colleagues on the panel have better expertise in this regard than I do, but I'd like to hear it discussed.
How about Betsy, over to you and take a stab at that.
Oh, well, I would actually save that for, I could make a comment on that later.
All right.
If that's okay, to help us get through the questions.
Yeah. All right. Pat,
Yeah.
do you have any advice?
I think there's like acrylic paints that actually can come very close to that sort of metallic quality, the sort of shimmering quality that you referred to in the presentation, but happy to discuss in the comments.
Okay, so let's move to comments then. Betsy, do you want to lead off?
I actually just have a question first.
Oh,
for
sorry.
Mark. Yeah, no,
Yep.
really fast. You mentioned that there were going to be some traffic calming initiatives at that location where the trucks and cars are coming into the lot. Have you contemplated doing a sloped curb so that the sidewalk actually stays at one elevation and the pedestrians don't have to step down and step back up, but the cars and trucks have to go up a little curb and down a little curb, almost like making the sidewalk a speed bump?
Yeah, the only thing maybe it's not clear and wasn't maybe focused on, but that there's actually no grade change between where the brick ends and the patio tech starts. It's like a roll curve or it's a flush condition, separated by bollards to prevent vehicles from going in. But it's meant to be kind of like a democratic plane across the whole surface. So the only way to do that would be to incorporate a kind of a speed bump. And I know we did talk about that, and I think there were some concerns because with the amount of vehicles that might be passing through, just the noise that it would make of the clunk clunk or people going regularly, it might be kind of not very appealing for the residents living there.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Paul, I'm happy to go into comments.
Yeah, you want to lead off with comments?
Absolutely. So thank you for, again, a wonderful presentation. I think this is going to be a really great building and an addition down to in the distillery district. I appreciate all the work you've done on the podium. It's come a long way, I think, now that we're seeing it for the third time. My one comment on scale is that you've done a great job breaking down the scale so it doesn't feel like a big downtown building. Don't be shy about reducing the height of the canopies in those big glazed areas. The awnings are at a really wonderful height for the commercial work. At the big entrances, you have like an awning quite high up, and those could potentially become, if you maybe want to go to the slide that has one of the awnings in the large the glassy area. I don't know what number that would be, but that would be really my only comment on the building, where that kind of awning makes it makes a jump. I love that you've got your mullions now creating light and shadow on the glass facade. That awning maybe could drop even a little bit more. It could come out more. It could maybe be something that's more like an awning for that weather protection and whatnot in that area, as opposed to kind of just being a formal line that's kind of slightly higher up. But I'm supportive of all the work you've done, especially on the podium piece. On the anodized, I think the comment that George is referring to was made on the data center. And on the data center, the idea of the copper was presented as copper in the presentation very specifically, and it was the building was really coming down to the ground. Here with the material, that kind of anodized material being up higher, and all the relief that you've introduced with the varying depths of the panels, I think it's much less of an issue on this building. So that's why it didn't even come to mind as a comment, because I think that what you're doing is you're creating some shimmer, but really what you're creating more is a play of light and shadow, which I think is going to be really wonderful. When I kind of drive between the east and the west regularly, and during sunrise and sunset, there's just a couple of buildings in Toronto that actually catch the light and kind of carry the light during these times. And I'm really hoping that this can be one of them. So looking at reflectivity, as Pat suggested, and anything that helps this building like come to life when it's being lit would be by the sun, not artificially, obviously, would be really welcome. And so that, I think, George, would be my comment there. Otherwise, those are my only comments. So
Okay.
Can't wait to see it. Thank you.
Thanks, Betsy. So George, we'll go to you next.
Well, I don't really have anything to add, although I wouldn't mind Pat elaborating her observation.
Okay, then we'll go to Pat next.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that metallic qualities of the reflective qualities of a paint surface are less metallic, or less, have a less, it's diminished. It's a little bit more matte, which is, I think, what Betsy's recalling that data center review that we did. So, but up high enough, I think, I mean, there are some new paint finishes that are actually will perform a little bit better in terms of giving a bit of a shimmer. But then I would also defer to Betsy's observation that the interest in this facade is really kind of the sort of inset panels, like the degree to which there's a sort of the fenestration of sort of niche and solid and void is working, will, I believe, give the building a lot of interest, certainly from a distance. So I think that's really quite successful. And then I'll just add on to the fact that I think that the kind of an appreciation of that sort of finer grain fenestration pulled down with a vertical proportion really makes the feeling along the street seem much more cohesive, particularly because there's grade-related townhouses on the north of it. So even if the uses are completely different from south to north, there's a little bit more continuity between the kind of making of facade. So I think that's actually really successful. The big move at the corner, I don't know that you need it with the big open sort of glazed corner. I think that there's a kind of really great feel for the sort of finer grains. I actually do think that could wrap around the corner and get away from that kind of slightly commercial feeling that some of the ground floor still has.
Paul, could I just add to what I said earlier that I'm not a big fan of ministerial zoning orders, but if one of the consequences of this increase in density is not only getting the affordable housing, but it's clear to me that the accommodation of landscape with these dropped slabs and the complexities proposed for the balustrades on the upper landscaped terraces, we're getting a lot of benefit from in terms of kind of refined detailing and positive results. And if that's related to the increase in density, it certainly makes a significant argument for it.
Okay, thanks, George. I'm sure others will remember that comment.
Indeed.
How be we go to Peter next?
Thanks. I just want to clarify the concern about the copper and my satisfaction with the solution that's been proposed. Copper in an acidic environment like Toronto degrades and gets into the groundwater, and it doesn't shimmer for long. It gets a patina on it. So I personally sworn off those types of metal finishes and appreciate what the architecture team has proposed. I also appreciate the changes in the podium, the reduction in scale due to the stepping and changing material color have really improved the project. I do beseech you to be active about protecting the crash wall from graffiti artists, and I think videography is publicly displayed is a great solution. I'm always confounded why there isn't rain protection provided along the building edge, along pedestrian routes in Toronto. It's an absolute requirement in other cities. That pathway and design for intimacy and pedestrian involvement would be supported by weather protection. Those are my comments. Thank you. It's a great
Thanks,
presentation.
Peter. Bridget?
Thank you. This is actually a really great view because you actually have really a kind of extension of Tank House Lane, which is one of, I would say, the kind of beloved streets in this part of the city. It's really pedestrian oriented, and at this portion it is pedestrian. And then by the time you get to the easterly end, it actually shifts to being pedestrian and vehicular. And in a way, it's unusual because you actually have residential on one side, retail and office on the other. And I think that it's a kind of unusual because of the townhouse condition on the north side of this pedestrian street. And I guess for me, I think it's a tricky thing. I appreciate all of the development that's happened since the last time that we saw it. And I guess for me, I look at the left side and I see a lot of plasticity, even though it's actually a new building. And I guess I'm actually thinking, and I appreciate the fact that the gray brick steps to the ground. And I also appreciate the fact that the kind of glazing that ends these north-south streets that I was referring to earlier actually helped to make the kind of shift, like the curve of your block 20 building. So it's a very unusual and I think interesting and challenging site. And I guess I'm kind of I think really careful attention to the type of gray brick that you select is really, for me, really key. It shouldn't look kind of slick or commercial. How does it relate to both the copper, anodized copper that you're referring to above, and then the red brick on the other side of the street? Because we're really creating, in effect, this kind of extension of Tank House Lane with new programs, introducing TTC, adding vehicular to this kind of urban experience. And I guess for me, the kind of focus on really ensuring that your north elevation is as amazing as it possibly could be, because it really is this kind of interesting kind of sort of east side of Cherry Street, and how you actually kind of create something that feels like the extension of the distillery, but introduces these other elements, I think is really challenging and really interesting as a design problem. And I feel like you're partway there, but I would really feel like the devil is in the details, and all the last pieces are going to really matter in terms of ensuring that it, really, really sings on a kind of complex site. I really appreciate your integration of the mechanical systems at the top of the building. I feel that that's one of the things that all of the projects in the West Donlands really have to do well, and you're not seeing kind of like a, mechanical systems at the top. And I appreciate the top of the building as a really, if it turns out to be the lantern that you're talking about, I think it'll be a really wonderful addition. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Great.
Can I just add something really? Can I add something really quickly at the end of Bridget's comment? Yeah. And it would be that the relationship that Bridget has just outlined really effectively with Tank House is much more important than the relationship with the crash wall.
Mm. I think that's well said. Okay, let's move to Fatty.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much. I'm also really excited and encouraged by the project. I'm especially excited about the color and material palette that we need to start to introduce to our towers in Toronto. I think the green, blue, gray spandrel mullion tower it's just been so overdone that I'm just so excited when I see towers come in and bring in a new fresh material palette that is also very reflective of its context. So I really just wanted to make a note of that. I also agree that the Tank House Lane drawings are really exciting and will be this amazing extension of both the distillery, but a connection to the Canary District. And we definitely need these types of streets in Toronto, these sort of intermediate kind of scale streets where you're really a kind of redefining that space as a kind of part of the public realm that is super exciting. And that's one of the best things about the distillery is that it's not following, normative street setbacks and typical, building block configurations that come from our zoning code, but instead sort of has to morph itself to fit with the placements of buildings according to completely different logic. And because we've got the constraints from the rail corridor plus the connection to the distillery, we end up with these idiosyncratic sort of spaces that you've designed really, really well with your team to create these types of new urban experiences. So I just wanted to also bring that out. I think Betsy spoke a little bit about the quality of the light and the microclimate, and I agree. And I think that will really come through both on the reflection from the buildings. But I forgot to ask Mark about the lighting strategy for this project because I did not, if I'm not mistaken, there was no nighttime renders, and I don't see any lights in any of the drawings. So I'm wondering if this is something that will come later and how you would treat nighttime or evening lighting, I think will also make or break the experience a little bit. I'll let Nina Marie comment on the planting palette, but I'm also really excited by it. I think it looks like there's an exciting mix. I'm excited to see some pines and evergreens in here as well. I think the contrast with the bricks will look fantastic. The herringbone pattern that you've shown in King Portland is really successful. I love walking by it. It's really great. And if this becomes part of the extension of the distillery brick paving into this district, it will make it look more modern, contemporary, and fresh, but still very reflective of the kind of brick heritage. I think the half circle wooden bench leaves a little bit more to be desired, to be honest. I think I would just maybe find ways to push that a little bit more. But other than that, thank you so much. I think this is really great. Oh, and one last thing, the continuous soil trench is essential. So thank you for keeping it in there, right in that big muse in the middle. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Nina Marie.
Thank you very much. I won't repeat, but rather just say I agree with my colleagues' comments, in particular Betsy's most recent comment about the relationship with the crash wall. And Fadi, thank you. You've highlighted some things that I would have added. The only thing extra to say here is, in addition to thanking you for the clarification around the use of both low E, low reflectant, and bird-footed glass, is that you've really done a huge improvement over the 3 times that we've seen this project, and really are to be commended. Just echo that. Much improved, and really created a very, very difficult space here, or you've worked with a very difficult, tightly constrained space, and I particularly would confine my comments here to landscape, that you've managed to balance the public and the private in a tough spot. And it's also a spot that, despite the relative near or adjacency of Corktown Common, we would still, for the density, consider this a park poor area. And you've had to do a lot with very little. So kudos to the landscape team here, very capably focused on tough species. And you did respond to our suggestions, which I appreciated. The palette's a very drought and shade tolerant palette that really does an interesting job of trying to include native species at the same time as they're meeting these tough challenges, which we all know actually some native species struggle with. They're not really adapted to urban conditions unless they are a hybrid combination. And so that's also a tough challenge. The integrated soil trench, Fadi just touched on this, but I'll say that there's no possible way to do street trees as part of public realm in this tight a condition without it. And it's so smart, and frankly, I just applaud the team for investing in what's invisible under the ground. There's no possible way to do it without that. So hard for the public and for other disciplines to understand it, but the investment goes into the ground, the drop slab and irrigation trench. I just want to say something a little maybe unusual for an ecologist to point out, but yeah, you know what? Trees talk to each other. We now know this. And so thank you for allowing not only the space for water irrigation, but actually for a really important root community. The rhizomatic communities above ground that you're creating now in the Rus typhina with the sumac to create this beautiful kind of screen that is cooling in the summer, colorful in the fall, transparent in the winter, and you can't kill them with the shovel because they spread by rhizomes, and they'll be all over the place, and you'll have to weed them out. But won't that be great? What a nice problem to have in a community that doesn't have a lot of vegetation. At the ground level, the drop slab irrigation trend, which increased soil volumes, is just the best thing going here. I like the dialogue between the roof garden and the at grade. Basically what you've done is give us a thickening of species to create much more space than we think we have, and to give us that incredible urban heat island reduction, as well as beauty and wind protection. Thank you very much. A really tough, urban, gritty palette. Mission accomplished. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Jana?
Thanks. I won't repeat what my colleagues said. I'm in agreement with all the points that are made. Just a couple of things. One, kudos for taking advantage of the drop slab on the 7th floor. I think that's going to make a huge difference in the experience of that space. I think the ability to grow larger trees here will add just a phenomenal amount of amenity to that outdoor area. I just wanted to reinforce what Pat said about the corner. I feel like looking at this image, there's not a sense of bringing the scale down to the level of the public, but actually the reverse, a kind of uplift at the corner. And when you look at the scale of the doors at what is probably a quarter of the length up, you realize how small a person is in the scale of that corner. And it seems to me that there might be a way to drag the alignments of the next level down of the windows or the brick frame to drop it down even more. And then following from that, further down the tank lane.
We'll be finished in a few minutes.
Okay, I will. Following that, further down the tank lane where you've used what appears to be patterned glass screens to block the back of house functions. I'd encourage you to think about something that has a smaller unit dimension like masonry. Again, to bring down the scale, there's all kinds of examples of really great buildings. I'm thinking about the classic buildings in Manhattan, in the old part of Manhattan, that had really, very few windows in the first scale, but had such a pleasurable sense of materiality that it becomes much more conducive to making a fantastic pedestrian informed street. Thanks very much.
Okay, Pat, do you want to add any comments from your perspective?
I already actually made a couple of comments, so I'm done. Thanks.
Okay, great, no problem. Okay, let's go to Jeff.
Yeah, not much to add. I think maybe I'll steal Kevin's thunder and talk about embodied carbon and structure is one area that we still we haven't seen anything on, and lots of work you can do here around materiality. And then obviously the important thing long run is fuel flexibility around the heating system. So tapping into district energy, obviously looking at low carbon, no carbon fuels in future, and making sure you're designing for that now is going to be the critical thing to hitting the sustainability goals. So overall, I think I like to see you're also pursuing continuing to look at some other innovations. I think we're really close to seeing some really exciting new technologies in the market. So I encourage you to continue looking at those in these projects, but overall I think progress has been great. Thanks.
Okay, great, thanks. Kevin?
Thank you very much. I just want to follow up on my question, and I'm really encouraged to hear that maybe we could look at a low carbon heating system. I don't think a lot of work has been done on the blocking and stacking and the passive measures, so it doesn't necessarily have to change the basic armature of the building. But what I wanted to suggest to Brandon I thank him for saying that he'll look at that, and I'm very sensitive to how challenging that is. We do have to worry very carefully on the capital impact of these systems. But what I wanted to suggest, so my commentary is, as we look at potentially decentralized heat pump system, I just want to suggest some of the trade-offs that might make it financially advantageous. So currently we have a heating system, it's gas-fired. This is driving up the carbon intensity. We have a cooling system there that has a high COP. We have a 4-pipe fan coil system servicing the units. If we can go to an ambient loop and then have one potential heat pump servicing that ambient loop, or let's say we don't want to go the heat pump approach, we do gas-fired boiler and chiller. We go to a 2-pipe solution with the decentralized heat pumps. We already have the fan coil in place. So yes, the heat pump is a little more expensive, but we swap that out. We get rid of all of that infrastructure of going from a 4-pipe to a 2-pipe. So there's an offset of costs. And I think this is important to keep in mind. But more importantly, that boiler and chiller, if we still want to maintain it, I would suggest in the kind of diversity of loading, we have the residential and we have the commercial, they can work together. We can superimpose those loads, move a lot of heat around within the building. So that power plant will shrink probably to half the size. So we have to maintain that capital savings in this analysis. And as we do that, this is potentially where we can make that solution work from a capital expenditure perspective. And I just want to add one more thing, that switch going from the central heating and cooling to a decentralized approach, the ambient loop, there's going to be significant carbon savings. We can maybe go from 18 to less than 10. So maybe we can do a quick calculation for the owner, suggesting what that future savings will be ongoing with the impending carbon tax at around $300 a ton. And that might help change or at least build in that flexibility to that system. So that's I just hope you keep that in mind during that analysis. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. I guess last is Matthew.
Thanks, Paul, and thank you for the great presentation. I agree with my colleagues. There's a lot of work and progress that's occurred on this building design since I've only seen it twice now, but it's getting better every time. You've mentioned in your presentation that this is a gateway building, and I completely agree. And as a gateway building, it needs to have a high level of design from its head right down to its toes. I'm still concerned about this safety wall, the break wall. And I'm trying to figure out what the best approach to take is, or what's worse, having a very long blank concrete wall that's smooth or graffiti on it. And I would suggest that the team takes some time to figure out a very clear strategy about how they're going to approach this wall, which is going to be, essentially what you're going to see when you enter the city from the east. If it's not texture, maybe you can look at doing something that's a curated piece of public art. And I would also argue that, graffiti in this day and age is considered to be public art. And if you can curate something that's quite beautiful, then people are not going to paint over it. So just some attention being paid to that. Otherwise, fantastic work. Thank you for presenting today.
Okay, thanks very much.
This is George. Can I just add one point? And it's not really addressed to the proponents because I know it's outside their scope, but I just wanted to remind people that, and especially Deanne Mighton and her colleagues from city planning, we still need this pedestrian crosswalk linking the distillery district part of Tank House Lane to the new part to the east. So we have to leave that ball in their court, but it's obviously a crucial component if this is going to work properly. Thanks.
Yeah, well, thanks for adding that, George. Okay, thanks everyone. I'm going to try and capture all these great comments, and then we'll give the proponent a chance to respond and take our vote. I think I'm just going to start by saying this is the third time we've seen it, and for me, and I think for the panel, this really speaks to the value of the design review process. This building has evolved. The comments that we have made at these different points in time have been seriously considered. The building's been reevaluated, and I think the revisions that we are looking at today speak for themselves. The project has evolved not only at grade, the podium level, the landscaping strategy, the tower itself, and the actual penthouse. So I just want to say that by way of introduction. There are many, many comments, and I'll try and group them in sort of categories. I think generally people certainly appreciate the fact that the scale has been broken down more throughout the podium. The fenestration details have been refined. There's been a comment just made at the, excuse me, let me get rid of this phone call here that just interrupted me. With respect to the fenestration, I think there was a general desire to get away from the kind of commercial feeling of larger windows at grade. And I think that has been successful, although there's still some suggestions made about the image we're looking at now that perhaps that corner large window, as someone said, in relation to the scale of a pedestrian, could be brought down another level. With respect to the stepping of the podium, I think that's been a desirable addition that we've commented on. Some suggestions made about further refinements. The power of Tank House Lane and the continuity and relationship of the Tank House Lane to the west to this is very strong. It's going to be continuous, unique experience and provide a great east-west pedestrian connection from the Distillery District through towards the balance of the West Don Lands. And I guess George's last little comment is appropriate at this point. I think a pedestrian crosswalk is essential there, and the examples he gave earlier in our meeting about the city installing various pedestrian crosswalks on such busy roads as Avenue Road and south of Queen's Park speak for themselves. So I think that's something that cannot be forgotten. With respect to the use of the gray brick, there's been some questions and comments about that, but I think people are generally satisfied with that selection of materials in relationship to the more red brick of the actual tower itself. But there was a suggestion and a comment made about the selection of the gray brick is really going to be key. It's got to really be harmonious and the right texture to make it really work. Some concerns expressed about the crash wall in terms of graffiti and safety, etc. And I think they're valid because especially when you come in to the downtown, whether by vehicle or on the train, remember there's about 20 via trains a day that come in from Ottawa and Montreal. Then they will go right by this. And that is one of the first big, views people will get of the downtown. So I think the suggestions about installation of video recording for graffiti problems, investigate all the anti-graffiti coding options are self-explanatory. But I still think it would be wonderful to figure out if there was an opportunity for public art in this crash wall. Some other refinements and suggestions made about rain protection, weather protection along the pedestrian routes would be a desirable addition. With a concern, not a concern, but a question more about evening lighting strategy. What will that look like? That has to be still addressed. And strong support for the basic landscaping strategy in the public realm and the private landscape treatment on the various elevations of the podium. Strong support, especially for the continuous soil trench down Tank House Lane, which is essential to maintain quality vegetation and enhance that experience. There's another couple of areas I'd like to just highlight, and one is in terms of the affordable housing. A question was made about the percentage, and I believe the figure was 30%. And I think that's really important to emphasize that here is a building and a project and a complex that's big, it's complex, it's received a lot of detail, attention over the many months that we've been considering it. But this is going to be a great place to live for people of all incomes. And I think the fact of that quality of environment for our affordable housing component is really important to not forget and to emphasize. And I guess perhaps maybe the final comment, generally speaking, is You've heard an appeal from our energy experts to, in fact, investigate the potential regarding sustainability goals, achieving higher sustainability goals for decentralized heat pumps solutions, perhaps decentralized heat pumps in units, lower carbon heating options, and you've heard a plea to make that investigation and that analysis, because that may provide significant cost savings that in fact improve the sustainability goals for the overall project. So I think in general, people are very supportive, very happy with the outcome, and we look forward to seeing it move forward. So I'll ask the proponent if you wish to respond to what you've heard from the panel members, and then we'll take our vote.
Hi, Paul. It's Jordan here from Dream. I think just on behalf of the DKT partnership and the whole design team, we just want to take this opportunity to thank the panel for reviewing our submissions and for the constructive feedback. It's been a really positive experience overall, and I think to your point speaks to the the benefit of the DRP. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's take a vote. I would propose, hearing the nature of the comments, a vote of support on behalf of the panel members. Is everyone in agreement with that? No one in disagreement, so treat it as a unanimous vote of support. Thank you very, very much for your presentation and for all the hard work that you've shared with us today. I think it's going to be a great project.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye.
Well, I think this concludes the public session. We're pretty well right on time. We can formally adjourn the public session. I believe, Chris, if you're still there, you want to go into in camera for a very, very short period of time.